Hello and welcome. Nico, thank you for the tier one. Not sure if it's just me, no music or sound. I actually, there was no music this time. Okay. The reason there was no music this time, that's not going to be like an always thing, but like, I kind of just did the no music, no spitting. No, look, the reason I didn't do music was because, the last few times I did music, because I'm doing multi-stream now, so we're on Twitch and we're on YouTube. And like for whatever reason, well, I mean I know the reason. YouTube is like really shitty with like music. And so a lot of times the tracks that I used to play that were okay for Twitch are suddenly not okay when you play that shit on YouTube. There are tracks that are okay. There's tracks that are okay, but a lot of stuff is not, and I have to sort out like what stuff isn't and what stuff is. Um, but yeah, just so that we could avoid like the copyright thing, I just decided to forego music today. Yeah, on the Twitch side of things, Twitch chat knows we used to have fun, right? We had fun on Twitch. We could do anything on Twitch. YouTube is such a little ugh, you know? Anyway, uh after major news like this happens, I always want to have a conversation with the community because I feel like it's incredibly beneficial. As I always say, I don't want to just amplify my own opinion. I also want this channel, my voice, to be the amplification of y'all's opinion. That's so Texan. I'm so Texan. You guys' opinion as well, right? So I did want to go over some stuff, react to some stuff, and just kind of touch base with you guys and see where everyone's at with regards to, all the stuff that's been going on. So first thing real quick, I changed my audio settings before we did this stream, and I tested it 20,000 times. Now I have a fan that is sitting right next to me right here. By the way, those who tuned into the last stream where I broke my fan, I have gotten a new one from Amazon. It's a little mini. Anyway, I have a new fan. You're good? No fan noises? Okay, good. Did I fix my fan? No, that thing was gone, bro. I like lifted it up, and I think that like the little thing, like the cage on the outside, like it went loose. And so what happened is that it like caused the blade to shift over and start hitting the thing, which like broke the gear or whatever the fuck is inside of a fan. I don't know. Yeah, it broke the gear thing and it stopped working. So RIP my old fan. We need to welcome our new fan, which this fan in particular, I got it from Amazon. I set the AC down to like 74 while I'm doing this stream here. So hopefully that is going to allow us to not be incredibly hot. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna say fuck it. I'm gonna set the AC to 72. My girlfriend will kill me for that, but it's gonna be for like, for like 2-ish hours while we do this stream, right? It is not gonna it is not gonna make our electric bill too ridiculous. Not yet anyway. Not until we get into like midsummer. But it is pretty hot today. And streaming is always like stupid hot. Like it's always like stupid hot. So if you broke the fan on stream, call it content and write out the new. My man, that is exactly what I'm going to do. Yes. So, as you guys know, as you may have seen in my latest video, we had some news yesterday that was mostly not good, right? So some of it was good. Some of it we got, ignore my stupid ass hair. Some of it we did get that was good. Actually, only one thing was good, and that is that Square Enix is going to be, in their words, aggressively targeting multi-platform, which is great. I think that, exclusives are great in the sense that they sell consoles, but in terms of like third-party exclusives, I don't think that there is really a need for third-party exclusives, really. To Square Enix's benefit, I think that being on PC day one will help them a lot. Some people have made a point about Xbox. I really don't think being on Xbox is going to help them in the way that some people are trying to say. Xbox is in its own really rough state. And the sales of Xbox have been declining really fast. I'm talking about really fast. I saw some stuff today, and it did not look too good for Xbox. So I would not want to be in Microsoft's position right now. Of course, after what Microsoft has been doing lately, they can get bit. So putting it politely, I'm worried about Part 3 scope. Do you think the final game is going to be scaled down in response to this new redirect with how expensive the AAA gaming has ballooned and how bad Rebirth did in sales? That's a tough topic. There was a Maximilian Dude video that I wanted to react to, and I think we're going to do that because Max actually just put out a video on this. I'm still collecting thoughts from the community on this, so I actually have a video planned on that exact topic that you can expect this week-ish. But it's very tough. It's very tough. So there are two choices, I think, that Square Enix can make, right? When it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. The first choice that you make is that you keep the budget the same, even though Rebirth didn't perform that well. And the benefit of that, even though it is not quite as profitable as, or probably, because Part 3 is going to sell less than Rebirth. Point blank. That's just the way any 3-part series works, right? Like, each part in a series tends to sell less than the other one. It's not necessarily always the case, right? It only tends to be the opposite of the case when you have like a self-contained piece within like a trilogy or something like that, where you can kind of explode upward, right? So Mass Effect 2, Witcher 3, God of War 2018. These games were things where the franchise would explode at that point. So it's very difficult to see Part 3 potentially being that point. Not saying that it can't, right? Because again, the third game for The Witcher was like that. God of War, the fourth mainline God of War game, 2018, was a huge explosion in sales. God of War game sold like 5 million units before that, and then God of War 2018 comes out and it sells like 23 million units. So you can have those points where things do explode. That's not impossible. I'd say 2018 was more of a reboot, right? And that's the thing, right? Is that whenever you have something self-contained, it seems to me that the numbering does not necessarily affect it as bad as something that is part of like an ongoing saga. And that's not to say you can't have things that are connected, right? Like Mass Effect, that is very much connected. But that is to say that a lot of people hopped in with Mass Effect on Mass Effect 2. Yeah, and Yakuza 8 sold well, and so did 7, and yeah. So it's not impossible, but the assumption is that Part 3 is going to sell less than 1 and 2. that is, especially for Square Enix, when they do multi-part stuff, it does tend to be like that. So again, the first option is that they keep the budget the same, even if the third part of the game doesn't sell less, because again, if they do make it multi-platform, there is a possibility that it sells more on day one. But I just don't know if that's going to result in substantially bigger sales, especially considering if those platforms didn't do it. Max was saying in his video that they already have the budget allocated for part 3. Right. So, I mean, yeah, Max is probably right. We're gonna actually watch Max's video in a bit here. So that'll be good. I'm really looking forward to the next time me and Max get to talk about FF7. Great guy. That podcast was really fun. That was such a awesome thing that we got to do there. I really enjoyed it. It should have turned down the FF16 exclusives after FF7 remake sales on a mature PS4 could not surpass the Ghost of Tsushima new IP sales. Wait, what? Oh, they should not have like done the exclusivity. I don't know. I think the worst part of the exclusivity was definitely signing it so that PC doesn't get a day one or is so far off, like 18 months. Right? Because I mean, thinking even with part 1, I think, PS4 was like tremendously insane with sales, so. But I don't think it hurts them for PC to be day one, right? I mean, Helldivers 2 has become like the fastest selling PlayStation game ever, and that's on PC, and that also has a thriving PC community as well. And I just don't think that it hurt anyone. I think PC is really a neutral place, and I think that it's just a good idea for everybody to have their games on PC, except for maybe Nintendo, which Nintendo never would. Although, Nintendo would still sell a quadrillion copies on PC. Nintendo has every reason to port their back catalog to PC, but they never would. So, no sense of even hoping for that. PS5's install base are mostly casuals. The top 10 most played game of PS5s are... I mean, that's going to be any platform, right? That's going to scale. Madden, FIFA, and Fortnite are going to be the most popularly played games on anything because most gamers, by definition, are casual, right? Like, the number of gamers that exist, it's literally mostly casual. So, you kind of have to make things that appeal to the casual audience, otherwise you don't exist. But that's not to say that you can't make... Joshy Poo, thank you so much for the $2. Appreciate the super chat, man. How do you think a PlayStation 6 Unreal Engine 5 re-trilogy will sell? I don't think Square can just play more AAA-ness to fix the solution, right? Like, I don't know if like more graphics and more stuff is going to work. This is actually kind of the problem with AAA, like as we speak at scale, is that like we keep making things even more AAA than they were, right? Like, I think maybe I speak for most people when I say this, maybe. But I think we haven't really seen a substantial like leap this generation, right? Do you guys agree with that? Am I talking out of my butt? But I think that this generation has provided the smallest leap ever. Like, most of the leap has been in like what the SSD provides and not in like what the actual GPU and stuff is doing. Yeah, yeah. Like I feel like PS5 games are PS4 games running on ultra PC settings, right? But it's still at its core like a PS4 game with some not Insomniac went hard. No, don't get me wrong. Like I'm definitely not saying that there aren't some PS5 games out there that like really don't look like a leap. But even then, right? Like I think that like right now the best looking game like objectively, all biases set aside, the best looking video game that has been produced to date is Horizon Forbidden West. Like objectively, like that is the best looking video game. You can say whatever you want about the game, the story, whatever. But if you look at it, Horizon Forbidden West is the best looking video game like ever made. But but guess what? It still runs on a PS4. It still runs on a PS4, guys. Like all things aside, it still runs on a PS4. And so to me that really calls into question like the AAA-ness of like it does sound like AAA-ness. Um but the AAA fidelity, right? Like where is this going? Where does this end? Like, oh, Puppy Duck, holy crap, dude. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the $100 super chat. Jesus. Okay, bro. Question I have been mulling over since I read SE. We're going to optimize workflow and query amity control. Will they writer's room? What do you mean? I'm a little bit confused by what you mean by will they writer's room the scenario part 3 with the retirement of the CBUs will follows like Natsuko Ishikawa be helping Nojima. Oh, okay. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Because basically, to my understanding, like the company is like flat now, right? Because they're talking about like all the divisions are basically going to be like sharing creativity, sharing knowledge and stuff like that. And essentially what you're asking me, or my understanding of what you're asking me is that will that impact how teams will work together? So like could you see like Natsuko Ishikawa from CBU3 working with Kazushige Nojima in order to like say write the story. Puppy Duck, no worries. I still got what you meant. No worries. And thank you again for the very, 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 very generous super chat. You're amazing. So yeah, I don't know, right? Because there was a specific line in there about relying on the creativity of the individual. And something else that Kiryu has done that I think is a little bit lesser known is that Kiryu has made it. So, do you guys remember the old Square Enix where Nomura was working on 200 projects at one time? And there were just all these memes about, does this guy sleep at all? He continuously works on all of these projects all at once. And it's just like, what? Kiryu is the CEO, for those who don't know. Not to be confused with Like a Dragon. So he's actually put a limit on how many projects you can be working on at the same time, which I actually think is really good. Ruger is saying, thank you so much for the $1 super chat. I appreciate it. I think that's awesome. I think it's great that they can't like take a guy like Nomura and like milk the loving crap out of him. One, for his health, he's getting older now, and I don't know, you know, like to what extent he's involved with everything, although it seems like he's very heavily involved. But two, I think that like they have a couple of guys who produce kind of like the bulk of creativity. And I think that needs to stop. So I think that they need to, really allow their younger teams, the younger staff on there to thrive. So to answer your question, do I think that it could result in like stuff like Ishikawa helping Nojima planning and writing? I don't think it will really come into play this generation, or not this generation, like this set of upcoming games that are already in the pipeline, because of how meticulously planned out games are. And also too, kind of like the wall of just respect for other creatives, which is also like very huge thing in Japanese culture. So I don't see that like Ishikawa or someone stepping in and being like, hey, this is what you need to do for part 3. But I do think that what this could mean is that for, let's say we have a hypothetical Final Fantasy 17, and I hope Final Fantasy 17 is not hypothetical, but let's suppose we have Final Fantasy 17, right? And with FF17, they say, okay, we're gonna use Reed Trilogy's idea of like, you hit an enemy really hard and that builds ATB, and we're gonna do like our own type of battle system based on that. We're gonna continue that style of combat, right? They would sort of have access to the creatives in CBU1 in order to develop that, right? Because one thing that became really apparent to me during the development of Final Fantasy 16 is that with Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Remake, they were kind of like, they were not looking at each other's homework at all. Right? There was no referencing of what the other guys were really doing. Or at least it felt like that way from the outsider. Now we can always get an interview and that comes out, and then that's like completely untrue, right? But it feels like it could have been developed by both of these games could have been developed by two wholly different companies altogether. And not to say that there shouldn't be any difference between the two. I don't want to communicate that. But it's just to say that I do think that probably those two games would have both benefited from them having a discussion about what they're both doing, and kind of like what the impact of that is, and like what Final Fantasy is. I don't like to disagree with the creators too much in a blunt way. But I do often think about that interview with Kitase and Nomura, where Kitase and Yoshi P, where Kitase told Yoshi P kind of like, what is Final Fantasy basically, and he was just kind of like, do whatever. And I they are the creators, right? And I do respect their creative vision, but I do think that do whatever, that sort of mentality, I do think that considering the state of FF, that FF doesn't have the place for it to just do whatever and just be whatever. I don't remember that interview. Kino, it was the interview where Yoshi P said that he talked to Kitase and was kind of like, is everything I'm doing okay for a Final Fantasy? And Yoshi P said that Kitase said, I should do whatever I think is the best game. Right? It was not literally do whatever, to be clear, for those who want to be like a little bit more explicit. But I do think that Final Fantasy does need some. I do think that Final Fantasy does need some structure for what it's going to be, right? And I do think that inadvertently, what I think Sakaguchi provided back in the day was that Sakaguchi was that structure, right? Where Sakaguchi had these ideas and kind of said it's going to be this way, and Sakaguchi also kind of had like that quality filter where I think that it was able to do that, right? Again, I don't know everything that goes on inside of Square Enix's office. Again, I don't usually I don't really like to say, oh, creators are like necessarily wrong about like their own thing or whatever, right? But that's just an observation to me as an outsider, as a guy who's been in this series for basically my whole life, that there does seem to be a benefit from having an identity and saying we are doing this and we're not going to do that, right? And saying this is kind of the standard of thing that we do. And quite honestly saying, you know, sometimes that like I understand that there's a sentiment that, you know, we could say that Final Fantasy can be anything and that's like kind of the magic of it. But I also feel like there is another side of that discussion where if something can be literally anything, then it's also absolutely nothing. Right? Like at some point it has to be a thing, right? It has to be something. Because otherwise if it can be anything, then the name is just a brand. It's not a finite thing. It's just a concept. And not even like an actual concept, like an abstract concept that like what is it, right? So I do think that there should be some decision to say that this is a thing that we are doing, and that's it. I know, right? Because and that's not to say we can't have things that are awesome and dip out and like, you know, make crazy fun. Because Sakaguchi also made like spirits with, which also wasn't a great idea, but you know. But I do think that is a key strategy, right? To say that this is the kind of game that we make. And I do think that 7R trilogy has done a really good job of making that kind of standardizing what people expect from Final Fantasy, right? Because I feel like every time a new one is announced, we have the same conversations about what people want. And it's always the same thing. Playable party members, right? Playable party members has been made like the point of discourse so many times, right? Basically since even like 13, where people didn't like that you couldn't like change your party member mid-battle. That's kind of like when like the first thing started. And then with 15, like launch 15, for those who played 15 later, at launch 15, you could only play Noctis. You couldn't play any other character in the game. So it kind of became this thing as time went on, where, you know, this discussion around playable characters. Suryata, am I saying your name right? I always butcher it. Hello. It always became this thing where everyone demands it, right? So I think Ruger saying, thank you so much for the $5. I can't believe that DMC5 is outselling Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. There is something wrong with FF brand when it comes to. I mean, I yeah, Final Fantasy is. I mean, Resident Evil, right? Like Resident Evil is the one I think about, right? Because like Resident Evil was niche as fuck growing up, right? Like Resident Evil was like not that big, and now Resident Evil like dwarfs Final Fantasy by a large margin. So FF can be anything. First of all, Nick, thank you for the super chat. FF can be anything from a character settings and story standpoint. It was never anything when it was at its peak. It had a gameplay identity in the golden age while also emphasizing on different mechanics title to title. Yes, that's exactly it, Nick. And that's how I feel too. Is that like, think about how different Final Fantasy IV is from Final Fantasy X, from Final Fantasy VII, right? And like you said, the characters, the setting, the narrative, and a lot of the mechanics in between were all different, right? But because there was kind of that underlying gameplay identity, and yes, at the time, there were people that did say that, like, oh, this isn't Final Fantasy, right? But like, because of like setting changes and stuff like that. But that's always going to be part of the series. But like when you look back, there's always a cohesion and a quality associated with those titles, and that's because they had a style in place and they weren't reinventing the wheel every single time. What if Dawn Trail underperforms compared to Endwalker? Severa LF, thank you so much for the super chat. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine Dawn Trail performing anything near Endwalker because Endwalker was really, really huge. Endwalker was incredible. I mean, the launch of Endwalker was like nuts. Andrew, thank you for the super chat. I'm so excited to be able to play FF on Xbox. That's awesome. I'm glad you're going to be able to play it on your preferred platform. Okay, so let me dial that back because that was incorrect and not exactly what I meant. Resident Evil was not niche. That is correct. But Resident Evil was niche compared to, I meant that relatively compared to Final Fantasy. So my mistake. RE was never really niche because they both sold a few million on PS1. So, but it wasn't as mainstream as it is now, and it wasn't as mainstream as Final Fantasy, right? Because RE1 and 2 selling like 5 million versus like, FF7 OG selling like 14. I meant that in relative terms. So, yes. Whereas like Resident Evil games now sell even way more. So forgive me for that. Not quite what I meant to communicate. Not that it was niche, but just that it was a smaller game. Yeah, far less mainstream, right? Because RE2 sold 5 million and RE2 Remake is at like 13. So RE2 Remake is almost triple the size of a release. So I used niche inappropriately there. I meant relative to that. DMC was niche, but is now outselling. Ruger, thank you again for the super chat. Yeah, DMC was also too like a much smaller franchise. But again, one thing about Capcom is that Capcom has been really killing it, right? Like Capcom has been doing amazing. Almost all of their IPs across the board are growing. I can't really think offhand, maybe if there's a really big Capcom head in here, but I don't know any IP of Capcom's right now that they're currently producing that is like shrinking in any regard. I'm going to push back on this because I've seen this on my video and I've seen this in chat a couple of times on here. And I just have to push back on this because I think that it's just so silly. It's late here before I go. As long as the ethics department enforce DEI to make a point, game sales won't ever recover. Dude, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think anyone cares. No one cares. I certainly don't care. Normal people, average people who aren't, listening to grifters on the internet don't care. They don't care. Most people just play games because they're fun, right? Like, that's it. People don't care about that stuff, man. They just want to play fun games, you know? Like, what happened? It's so funny because people, the same groups of people will say that boycotts don't work and then be like, well, no one's playing it because, this. Well, I'm like, well, then you're boycotting it. So do boycotts not work or they do work? Which one is it? Which one fucking is it? It's ridiculous. So yeah, that has nothing to do with. And I mean, if you want to talk about, that stuff not selling, then like go look at Baldur's Gate 3, Game of the Year. Please go look at Baldur's Gate 3. I just want to signal boost Nick's point. Thank you so much again, Puppy Duck, for the super chat. I think releasing FF16 and Rebirth together in the same fiscal year really seemed to have split fans. I love how you observe that the CBUs were not sharing notes. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that we had two things released this year that were called, or not this year, this fiscal year of Square Enix's, that were called Final Fantasy, that weren't even in the same genre of video game. Right? So I think that Final Fantasy at least needs to have, like, it needs to at least decide like what genre it's in at the very least. And I think they need to not reinvent the wheel. I think that's a really important thing just for general quality control. Are you a Monster Hunter fan or not? Okay, so I've been meaning to get into Monster Hunter forever. I'm going to be a Monster Hunter fan. Like, before the next Monster Hunter game comes out, I'm going to be a Monster Hunter head. For sure. Edgar, thank you for the $2 super chat. I'm going to become a Monster Hunter head. I promise you. Because I always see Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter looks so cool. I've never gotten into the series. I'm gonna get into Monster Hunter. Wheat Ninja 99, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. DEI isn't the problem. Thank you. These companies sacrificing studios are the issue. Thank you. Yes, perfectly said. Couldn't agree more. Right. It's something that Satoru Iwata, he said really well, where it's like, how can people focus on making great games when they're worried whether or not they will have a job tomorrow? When they're worried whether or not they will have a job when the game releases. Could you do your best work, your best creative work, with a metaphorical gun held to your head the whole time you're doing it? No, right? Josh Z, thank you so much for the super chat. I'm not sure part 3 will be affected by the recent news. The future of the series depends on games being put in a position to succeed financially. That is what SC has sucked at in the recent years. Yeah. Josh, very, very, very well said. I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, so many games have basically just been sent to do the death march, right? Like, they can't just keep releasing games to just send them out there to die, right? Like, they released a new Saga game. Did anyone care? Did anyone buy that? They sent that thing out there to die. Right? Like, so many games Foam Stars, right? Is it time for FF17 to just be called Final Fantasy and be a soft reboot, just like God of War 2018? They might need to market that way. Ruger, thank you so much for the super chat. I'm not opposed to Final Fantasy 17 just being called Final Fantasy. But I do think if it's going to be a reboot and just be called Final Fantasy, then it is going to have to be a game they're exceptionally confident in. Because that's the only way I'm going to accept a game that's flat called Final Fantasy, right? Because that's the face of the brand. I actually think you might be cooking by just saying this game is Final Fantasy, point blank. I think you might be cooking with that. Edgar, thank you so much for this super chat. Yeah, I hate when people bring, try to make this about culture war stuff when it's not. I assure you, normal people that bathe don't care about do not care either way about that stuff, man. People care about one thing. Is the game good? And they will play it regardless of anything else. That is all people care about. Is the game good? Does the story appeal to me? Does it resonate with me? That's it. There's nothing else to it. Yeah, I don't think creating a title called Final Fantasy, right, would be like the worst idea, but I do think that if you did that, you'd have to make an exceptionally good game. And it would have to be something that, like, I don't know, that kind of defined the series going forward. But yeah, so I think that's really important. I do wanna react to like Max's video. If you guys think that's cool to do, or do you guys just want to keep chatting? We can keep chatting. It's fine. I was gonna react to it, see what he actually had to say, but I think we're hitting a. Unless you guys really want to. Well, he put out one where he said, "Is part 3 in trouble?" You think I should watch it? Okay, let's watch it. Let's let me pull the thing up, and then let me make the window. Let me that's good. Brandon Lewis, thank you so much for the super chat. So, Knight, if they did Final Fantasy IX, would you prefer a remake or a remaster? I don't know, actually. Because the thing is, I think that Final Fantasy IX is already really good. And I also think that, like, in terms of, like, from the perspective of Final Fantasy IX, and the perspective of growing the franchise, I don't know if any remake is going to be able to do that at this point. I think that's, like, from the perspective of growing FF, we need a Final Fantasy 17 that shakes everything up in, like, a huge way. So I don't know if, like, oh, in fact, I would go as far as to say, like, the jokes about, oh, Square Enix can make $1 trillion if they just remake, like, Chrono Trigger or something like that. And not to say that they shouldn't remake Chrono Trigger, actually. But it's just to say that, like, the idea that Square Enix can just go back and just remake something and that'll fix any money problem, I feel like that meme, that idea is kind of, like, not true anymore. Like that was probably true like 15 years ago. Maybe 16 or 17 years ago, but I think now actually, like, because you could say, oh, remake like FF6 and that'll print money. Tell my 13-year-old nephew why he gives a damn about FF6. Explain to my 13-year-old nephew why he should care about FF6. Some boomer game to his perspective. He doesn't. Right? And so, you know, a lot of times we still think about this in terms of elder millennials and Gen X. And we're not thinking in terms of Gen Z and Gen Alpha enough when it comes to this stuff. What do you think contributed to FF15 selling so well? It was immaculately well marketed. It was a very well marketed game, and it had 10 years of existence to perpetuate the idea of it existing. And also, too, I think the idea of this being a video game that was in development for 10 years created this sort of unique aura around it that made people interested. And I also think that it's a really marketable game. The idea that you and three of your bros together go on a road trip is a really cool and unique idea. And I think that was kind of an easy sell. And I also think that the DLC, even though the DLC was not, was something that shouldn't have existed in the way that it did, because a lot of stuff in the DLC was story stuff that should have been in the base game, the DLC kept things relevant. Right? Like, I was making FF15 videos all the way up until 2019. Right? 2.5 years after the game had launched, I was still making FF15 videos. And so, even though I'm not a fan of the DLC strategy, the DLC did keep Final Fantasy 15 relevant and talked about as a single-player game far longer than most single-player games ever do. Another thing is that FF15 also had an anime called Brotherhood, and it was a short anime, but it was free on YouTube, and lots of people watched it. And that was also a gateway into it. And yeah, you also had the movie too. You also had Kingsglaive, which, I mean, it wasn't that great, but yeah, it was there. Right, exactly. So it did work. If you can't solve money with FF7 remake, you can make money problems with any remake. It's the grandma argument. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's watch. I'm sorry, I watch everything on 2x speed because I'm an ADHD individual, and it helps me. So let's see what Max had to say.
This is crazy. This is actually coming out right now. Long story short, Square Enix Financial was not doing great over the past year or so. Their last fiscal did not meet expectations on multiple fronts. We learned not even that long ago, several of their titles that were planned for the future got canceled, but they were not big mainstay titles. For anybody that forgot, Square Enix last year released so many goddamn games that you forgot about 90% of them. So few people even knew of their existence. And I'm not even talking, you knew about Forspoken, bro. You know that Forspoken exists.
Rick Scott, thank you for the $5 super chat. I appreciate it.
Chronicle and that Star Ocean game, Babylon Fall and Foam Stars came out, and huge variety of other wacky AA middle of the road budget games. Valkyrie Profile game came out, bro. Some new Saga games also came out, I'm pretty sure. There was so much that it was dude, these guys are just sending these games to die. What is happening here? And guess what? They all did. Yes, there was a big problem in terms of just their overall like development resources and strategy that resulted in them losing a shit ton of money, like down like 140, 150 million dollars, which is not good. Do they cancel Final Fantasy VII next? No, not at all, because that's effectively their breadwinner. If they can't get Final Fantasy VII to sell, that is not just the end of, you know, Final Fantasy VII. That is their golden goose. That's not happening, right? Mind you, people will take the doom and gloom route. That's not happening. The next game's happening. It's already budgeted. It's already going to be the same thing it is. Like, the larger games are still relatively unaffected by any of this stuff that's happening right now. However, most of that shit is going to be changing down the road because of the way their releases are going to be changing. And finally, Square Enix, like, woke the hell up. They did the thing they should have done 10 years ago, which is to get rid of exclusivity. Because what has platform exclusivity done for Square Enix? Minimized its audience. It's deeply minimized the amount of people that can play their games and have access to their games, and their games take 5 to 7 years to come out or some shit like that. Now there's just not as many new fans into this shit, making a lot more sense that
this is something that's really huge, right? Yoshi P actually pointed this out, that like you could go your entire, like, basically, like, you're like the length of time that like a kid's in like high school now, and there not be like a major FF release, right? Whereas like when I was growing up, there was always a new Final Fantasy, like always, right? Like when we boomers, when we were younger, there was always a new one, right? And yeah, you point this out really well, Kloss90, where you say that like that's how Resident Evil grew, was where there's always a new Resident Evil game, right? And so Resident Evil is always coming out. There's always a new Resident Evil game. And so I say boomer, I'm 32. I'm not that. I'm not that old. I'm saying like video game boomers. So basically like elder millennials. Yeah. Do you think it will take 10 years to release them on every console at the same time? What do you mean? The first mainline games came out within a 14-year span. Right. Yeah, the first 10 mainline games came out in a 14-year span, which is ridiculous, right? That's nuts. To court new people to an old series like FF that aren't hardcore RPG gamers, you think the developers need to have they need to be more explicit and have an optional mode to make it more friendly to these newcomers. No, I actually think the games are newcomer friendly enough. In fact, I think that Final Fantasy 16 in particular made the mistake of being too newcomer friendly in such a way that like anyone like well versed in action games would find the game to be perhaps maybe not as engaging because it feels really easy on that first playthrough. And basically, anytime you're not outside of Ultimaniac. You look really young for 32. I thought you were in your 20s. Aw, thanks. The trick, wear sunscreen. Always wear sunscreen. That's the trick. It will literally age you slower. That is scientifically proven. The biggest contributing factor to skin aging is UV light. So I wear sunscreen every single day on my face. Anyway, Brandon, thank you for the super chat. October 5th, 1992, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. I love that one too. Based. Or don't go outside. That's right. If you don't go outside, there is no UV light. Therefore, gaming keeps you young for longer. Think about it. Think about it. FF16 Ultimaniac says otherwise. No. I mean, that's actually my point, right? Is that Ultimaniac, the mode that unlocks after you play the game twice, is when that challenge begins. And most people, if they don't feel a sense of engagement on the first time, the chance of them playing it the second time becomes lower, and the chance of them going back and doing the Ultimaniac challenges for the third time playing that content becomes even less, right? And so, yeah, it's really difficult to tell someone play this 50 bare minimum, right? Like assuming that you do some side quest and go through the game, like 50-hour game twice, and then once you spent 100 hours, then you'll finally be able to unlock Ultimaniac, all the Ultimaniac challenges. You don't have to play through it twice. Am I not understanding correctly? Don't you have to do that in order to unlock the Ultimaniac challenges? I already think that I do enjoy like a new game plus heart mode, but I do think that even FF7 art also needs to have like a heart mode that's day one. And I'm not just talking about like dynamic, but I think that every player should be able to feel some type of challenge with the game day one, just because third person action games are common enough where people are becoming so proficient at them that that they get bored on normal difficulties. Cyprian, thank you so much for the super chat. Thoughts on Ever Crisis's story being incomplete? I'm not sure what you mean. Is it's not being shut down, so I don't know if I would say it's incomplete unless they shut it down, but I don't think they're gonna shut it down. So, but it would definitely suck if Ever Crisis got shut down before they got to complete it. But yeah, Limitless, to your point though, yeah, I don't think that from what I hear, Ultimaniac is sufficiently challenging, but I just can't boot the game up and play Ultimaniac is kind of the issue, right? When I think that Final Fantasy mode probably should have been available from day one, and I think that Ultimaniac should have been its own actual difficulty that was the new game plus difficulty and not just a selection. They should have gone the DMC route, right? And the thing too is also it would have probably benefited it more because DMC is a really short game, right? It's like a 12-hour game plus or minus, and you're constantly getting new abilities in that game, and it's really easy to replay, right? 70 hours in DMC looks very different than 70 hours in FF16, right? 70 hours in DMC, you're pretty proficient at the game, whereas 70 hours of FF16, you basically just complete the game once, and now you're playing it on Final Fantasy mode. And you're maybe a couple hours through, plus or minus. And so yeah, I think that's why DMC works with that same template, and why Final Fantasy 16 kind of doesn't, because 70 hours of DMC is multiple playthroughs, right? You learning a whole crap ton of stuff and becoming super efficient at that combat system, and learning each character, and in DMC 5 and stuff like that. It looks completely different. So yeah, I think that, I mean, 16 might be the longest hack and slash ever made, I think, offhand. I can't think of a hack and slash longer than it, because usually hack and slash games aren't usually meant to be that long, because their gameplay loop isn't doesn't really support a really long story driven campaign, right? You can skip cutscenes. right, but I think that's like sort of getting into like the issue, right? Is that like, 'cause people are saying you can skip cutscenes, but I think that's like getting into the issue of like making a hack and slash game that long. Um, DMC is like 8 hours long, which is great for a character action game. FF16 is like 80 hours long with a watered down DMC. Like, yeah, exactly, right? And think about how much faster you get abilities in DMC, right? Where DMC, you're always getting like a new ability, like every like 30 minutes, you have a new ability. Whereas in 16, you actually go quite a bit of time actually before you get new icons and stuff like that. So Nier is long, yeah, but Nier's like a 20-hour story tops, and you also control 3 different characters in Nier, and Nier also has like a lot of gameplay stuff that it does that keeps it kind of fresh in that way. Nier's 34 hours. If you do some quests, yeah, it's 34 hours. You do the side quests, but like Nier's about like a 20-hour. If we're talking about Automata, it's like a 20-hour game. Yeah, you can skip an Ultimaniac mode. Of course, you would skip an Ultimaniac mode because that's like the third time you're seeing the scene. I think you're being obtuse here, Limitless. Like I think that's a very obtuse argument to make, that after someone has already spent 100 hours in the game, that then they can finally get the thing they want, and then they could just skip the scenes. Like, yes, but like that's okay. I have to stop responding to this person. Let's keep
Console
going.
exclusivity for a lot of this shit is one of the bigger things that's affecting them, which is why their main strategy going forward is specifically that. This is dropping right now. Let's just read this shit because this is all from the recent fiscal and financial reports. 16 sales.
I wanted to talk. We'll talk about this like later because I wanted to talk about it too.
Fell short of expectation. Initial momentum fell in line, but the game failed to reach a fiscal year goal with the momentum slow. No updates from the sales number. Last announced at 3 million. Rebirth sales short of expectation. Initial momentum didn't reach initial target. No sales numbers to share. Foam Stars failed to meet expectations. Remains confident 16 can achieve its goal over the original 18-month plan. Also, sales of Rebirth and Foam Stars aren't necessarily bad, but reorganized development team into 5 console teams, 1 smartphone game team. Okay, so that sounds like kind of what Capcom has done. Has been relying too much on individuals' creativity, will promote sharing game making know-how among teams that will seek the best balance of individual creativity to organizational discipline. So this is very much in line with the way a lot of larger Japanese game studios work. Bandai Namco, Capcom, and Square Enix. You get these like dev teams that are working on one thing and nobody even communicates to any of the other big dev teams, right? Whether it's like Unit 1, Unit 2, Dev 1, Dev 2, like all these splitting classifications of like, organizations that are within each one of these companies. One learns and what one shares with the other is completely different. So if somebody had already like solved this problem of like, hey, we've fixed how to do this in FF7 Rebirth, you could possibly use that for the next Kingdom Hearts or Final Fantasy or whatever. Nope. Doesn't work that way. That is not the way this shit works. You do not have like active intercommunication between companies. However, that has changed a lot recently with Capcom, which is why the majority of Capcom games are coming online much faster than a lot of their titles did before, where even you can get, the frequency of Capcom games to the level of like, oh yeah, because they also have their own internal engine and yada, yada, yada. What I'm trying to say is that this isn't weird. This is the way that a lot of larger focused Japanese game studios have just run the ship. Then the majority of them have just done it this way. I think Nintendo is also extremely egregious with stuff like this, where it's like, oh yeah, what one side learns compared to the other is not really shared between. They're just doing their own thing,
Yeah, and this was something that's kind of differentiated a lot of Western developers from a lot of Japanese developers at one point in time, especially during like the PS3 era, where in the transition to that really was rough for a lot of Japanese developers, because at the time they had kind of been developing engines proprietary for each game, right? And so they hadn't really been reusing engines that frequently. And so when HD era gaming came around, and it wasn't as simple as making the games before, like on PS1, where there wasn't even the concept of really an engine. It was kind of just like you program the game. All right. So yeah, I think that what Max is saying is true here for sure.
This isn't teamwork, bro. These are thousands of people. This is quite literally the problem with massive game companies, where you're just so big, there's so many moving parts, there's very little relative organization, unless you have the people working on the individual projects. It was clear that Final Fantasy 16 had a lot of organization. It took a while to come online, but a lot of organization. Because that game, whether you like it or not, was effectively what they wanted to make. And it was like, yeah, I see exactly what they're going for here. Rebirth was the same way. It came online super fast. The directors and organization of those projects were damn good. Ultimately, when you have so many projects coming out in like the span of time that they do, now they just come out and nobody knows about them. There's huge fucking problems here, man. DQ12 remains under development. Investors' reaction, sell shares heavily. Oof. Stocks fell the day's trading limit. Concerns our pipelines have become too empty. No big titles that can lift up the company's top line over the next couple of years. Kingdom Hearts 4? Well, I think, chat, there's your answer. If your answer is like, what about Kingdom Hearts 4? No big titles that can lift the company's top line over the next couple of years. So it ain't coming out anytime soon. Thank God for Final Fantasy 14. This company has released potentially its greatest game in 20 years.
Yeah, man. I often think about like, where would Square Enix be without FF14, right? Like without that sort of guaranteed revenue stream in the expansion coming, Poof. Man.
In terms of overall reviews, right? It's in terms of perspective and reviews, they have created one of their most well-received titles, and a game that did not have an absolute cursed development like most of their games released in the past few months, which was FF7 Rebirth. As a game company, what else do you do? Like, they have created what is effectively one of their best games. We have to make it even better? Like, you have to think what's frustrating from their perspective as a developer, like the people internally, where it's like everyone just fired on all fucking cylinders and made a huge amount of people super happy with the release of this, but it just doesn't sell enough. The issue isn't the game development itself. The issue is a lot of other shit, the marketing, the exclusivity, and all that stuff. And it's good that Square realizes this as we get into the...
Yeah. I think I agree with this a ton. Right? Like, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth had a 93 on I think it went back up to 93 now on Metacritic, and is an exceptionally good game. I said in my review, I think it might actually be the best Final Fantasy ever made, purely from like, a content perspective. Like, it's just like, it's so overwhelmingly content dense, and most of the game is really high quality content, really good content. It's an amazing game. It feels like the game that FF15 set out to be, but like it actually kind of achieved it, like with its open world and stuff like that. Okay, it's back down to 92. That's still really good, right? Like, that's still, like a record for Final Fantasy. That's awesome. And yeah, dude, like it was an incredible game. And, to see it not really selling in the way that they'd hope, it sucks. But I don't think the problem was necessarily with Rebirth itself. Well, I do think that there are some issues with the re-trilogy that definitely didn't help the sales. Like, for example, I don't think that like necessarily telling the story in this way is helping sales, because I do think that the way the story is being told may be a barrier for newcomers, right? Because if you tell people you're going to start with Remake, they will tell you like, oh no, you need to know OG. right? And I've seen so many Twitter threads of people like saying like, "Oh, I'm gonna play Final Fantasy VII remake," and people will be like, "Oh, you're just gonna hop in the remake, and you don't know, you haven't played like this 1997 game with the Lego hands. Yikes! You're not gonna understand anything. It's not actually a remake; it's a sequel." So I will say that like that aspect of it, that aspect of it does not help. Like I can't tell you like is it hurting or like hurting to like what degree, but I do think that like when deciding on what to do with the narrative, that is not something that is just conceptually inclusive of newcomers. It puts up a barrier for them with doing it. So I can't tell you if that's like a finite reason or not, but I can tell you that the story itself does not compel new people to get into it. It just on like the surface conceptual level, it does create a situation where if you are new, this is harder to hop into the feeling of. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that many of you can make very decent arguments. I've had this argument with other people too, where you can still hop in, right? Like, and you don't have to do your research. But the feeling is there and the sentiment is there, and people repeat that sentiment. And so even if that is true, what kind of gets accepted as the truth becomes the truth, right? Ricker, thank you for another super chat. I really think a Rebirth is a quality game. PC, PS5, Switch 2, day one, in a self-contained game would do 10 plus million. Yeah. Like I think about Rebirth, and I was like, if Rebirth was like a Final Fantasy 17, and it was available on all the platforms you listed, and it was something that like, hey, anyone can buy this and play and get started, it would have been like 10 plus million. Like I completely agree, right? But like I think the issue with Rebirth simply comes down to it is a sequel to a remake sequel. And that is really challenging to sell like it is. And then part 3 will be a sequel to a remake sequel, right? So that's kind of the thing, right? So they had said at one point in time they had considered making this 2 parts. Kitase revealed that, right? In hindsight, I kind of think that 2 parts might have been the move in terms of like sales, right? Because I feel like doing 3 parts is really difficult. Remake is not a sequel. I get what you're saying, Nick. However, whether it is actually a sequel or not, the general sentiment, and if you look it up, and if you talk to people on social media, there is a large number of people that will say that it is a sequel. So, whether you personally believe it's just a remake or whether you personally believe it's just a sequel, and whether it actually is a remake, right? Because it really could just be like all the sequel stuff. Maybe it's just like literally in our head. It could be. That's the problem. You all keep pushing the narrative. Well, I mean, you know, I don't know if you mean you all as like content creators or just everybody else, but like, you know, to be clear, I mean, that's the way it appears to most people is that it's a sequel, right? Like if you played FF7 OG and the story cues that they give you, and we're talking about things like Omni Aerith and Omni Sephiroth from like a timeline, you know, post Advent Children and things like that, then we're talking about a sequel or some type of media that um, needs you to be informed of the original, right? Right, chat? I'm not BSing. That's still right. This is thank you, Kino. This is not meant to spiral into a theory discussion. I'm just saying that the sentiment that it is intimately connected to the previous media. And so there is a perception, when people are like, and you guys would also be surprised too that like I do know people, IRL normies, who were like who told me that they picked up Final Fantasy VII Remake and they actually didn't know that remake part 1 was just Midgar. And they actually got to the end and were like, oh. So that did happen. There were people who didn't. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's not to say that like a reboot or anything like that can't be like you need to be informed of like, what came before it in some way. Like I think it worked for God of War 2018, but I don't think you needed like intimate knowledge of God of War 2018 for God of War to really work. And God of War 2018 then ended up serving as like this great hopping in point, right? Like, because if you know who Kratos is, like in terms of like just general gaming culture, then you kind of understand everything you need to know about God of War 2018, right? Like, I think for that game, all you really need to know is that Kratos is angry. He's killed a lot of gods, and now he's trying to not do that anymore. And I think that's all the core information that you really need to know, right? And I summed all of that up for you in like 2 sentences, right? But also, and where I think that like God of War and like The Witcher 3 and games like that are so good is that I think that even without having all the answers and even without knowing every single thing, it's still a really enjoyable narrative, like a narrative experience to go through that game, right? Whereas like with something like Rebirth, if you're completely disconnected from everything FF7, the presence of Zack is like a complete like mystery, right? Like you don't really know. Supperin, thank you so much for the super chat. What if they reveal that FF7R trilogy is FF17? I mean, functionally it is, right? Like it is the stand-in FF17 until we have an officially numbered FF17. So, yeah, let's finish the Max video.
Next, like article talking about their plans for the future. Something needs to change, right? We can't release a Metacritic game that goes 92, 93 and is potential game of the year material, and it isn't hitting its sales expectations. What the fuck is going?
Yeah, like, do you guys think about like how crazy this is? Like, has this happened in recent years at all? Because Rebirth is extremely well positioned to win Game of the Year. And in my opinion, Limit Form, dude, what's up? And in my opinion, Rebirth is Game of the Year, hands down. Like, I do not know anything that is going to top FF7 Rebirth this year. The only thing that can maybe is Metaphor, right? Because I think, you have the developers from Persona working on it, and P5 reviewed exceptionally well. So the only thing that I can think of that will possibly challenge Rebirth is going to be Metaphor. And so it's just weird to think potentially we could have a Game of the Year that also underperformed. That is strange as fuck to think about. That is very strange to think about. And that also shows that there's an issue here, right? Like, if we can have something like that. Hades have any claim to anything when it gets out fully? Yeah, I don't think Hades like full release is coming this year though. I don't think Hades 2 like full is coming until next year. It's very, very weird. Dude, it's super weird. Like, and again, like, I really do think Rebirth is probably the best game that Square has made in a really long time. And honestly, probably one of the best games they've ever made. This sucks. But it's not Rebirth's fault. It's not the developer's fault. It's it's just the way that again, like the structuring of things and the kind of the sentiment that you need to play OG first and familiarize yourself with the compilation, then you can play remake, and then you can play Rebirth, right? But it's also kind of not true at the same time, right? Like again, like I was saying, like it's really easy to explain what God of War is. And like as long as you know what God of War fundamentally is, you already know enough to play God of War 2018. Right? And watch Advent Children, right? You already know what, like I said, I summed everything up you need to know to play God of War 18 in 2 sentences, right? That's it. You didn't need to know anything else. But I do think that one of the issues that Rebirth did have, though, is like, for example, with the presence of Zack for a newcomer, right? In a newcomer's position, I'm just thinking like, why does a newcomer know or care about Zack? They don't. At most, they care about Cloud, but only because Cloud is kind of like the iconic character that they know of, and probably the only Final Fantasy character they're familiar with, right? Maybe Squall and Tidus or some of the others, but they definitely know Cloud. I'm just glad that there seems to be an understanding now that we shouldn't put our AAA titles exclusively on console. I've never agreed with that. Yeah, when as many people can play as possible, everyone wins. So, yeah.
Going on. And obviously the big one has been Sony grabbing you by the balls, offering a big paycheck, and then offering you exclusivity. Again, I'm not worried about the budget for the next remake project. I'm not, because they seemingly probably got all of their money from Sony already. The problem with that is that they are quite literally stifling their audience. The PlayStation's doing terrible in Japan. It's doing good overall, but the actual reach and people that are buying games on PS5 is staggeringly low. Like way more than any other console. That's called an attach rate, where you have folks that are buying games for your system, right? And the amount of people that are buying games for their PS5 is significantly less than it was the PS4, significantly less than it was the PS3. Games are number one. The economy's different. Games are expensive. A lot of shit has changed since the pandemic and over the past like 5 to 6 years. There needs to be an adjustment to this shit. So new midterm or medium term plan. Enhance productivity by optimizing the development footprint in the digital entertainment segment. So, just overall digital game sales, not really relying on physical, I'm assuming is what that means. Diversify earnings opportunities by strengthening consumer contact points, roll out initiatives to create additional foundational stability, strike a balance between shareholder return and growth investment when allocating capital. These are all very fun things to hear, chat. The initiative, focus on development titles, delivering fun that only the group can create and build the development structure. Well, here's the big one. Shift to a multi-platform strategy, building continuous customer contact points of our titles by stepping up digital sales. Create the interaction with customers by increasing sophistication of publishing function, generating the opportunity of new revenue by offering IP across a range of entertainment experiences. So this is a lot of fluff work for saying us taking the Sony check is not working out. Over this period of time, them being effectively beholden to Sony has not net them returns in the long run, which is why Square Enix was doing so good in those what was it, the mid 2010s, like after the Tomb Raider era, right before the fucking Avengers shit. They were doing like relatively decent, overall that strategy wasn't exactly sound. It looked really good at the time, and big surprise, the industry has just changed a lot, right? The industry and how people consume the entire medium has looked very different. They're effectively saying that we cannot do this anymore, or we are only on one specific platform. And I'm hoping that obviously means that the Epic Game Store deals are going to go away. The PlayStation deals are going to go away. Let's read a little bit into it to see if we can find out what exactly is going on. The one thing I really hope for all of this shit is obviously like next Nintendo title. And when we read through all of this stuff, you start reading stuff of they don't mention what the next Nintendo system is. You can't look at a place like, and the next Nintendo system is 95% going to be a handheld again. There's no reason why it wouldn't be. You have to be looking at the potential sales of that platform or whatever next platform it's going to be, and being like, okay, I think the hope is that you're going to have a scalable platform that can do effectively what the other systems do, but just scale it down. If it runs at 720p, who gives a shit, you know? But that shit is going to be really important. This has already happened to several other titles in the fighting game space that I've deeply followed, and have allowed those games to soar to lengths that the initial sales expectations could not have expected. The ports were decent, and that was Dragon Ball FighterZ and Mortal Kombat 11. Not many other fighting games have managed to make its way to the Switch, but those games did, and those games on Switch were a dramatic impact in the overall sales of those titles. MK11 was sold a lot on Switch. It wasn't the best-selling console, but we're talking like a 15 to 20% install rate. And the same thing for Dragon Ball FighterZ. It sold pretty damn good on the Switch. And by the time a lot of these new big games from Square Enix eventually come out, there is going to be a new Nintendo system. Here's the thing that I am all...
Sorry, I was chewing. But yeah, that's the delta. That's the delta, right? Is Nintendo Switch. Because there's 140 million Switches sold. And that's a lot. So, and especially in Japan. So that's a pretty big deal.
Already going to be making an assumption about the release windows for these games is going to be later now. I don't think we're getting FF7 Remake Part 3 in the same 3-year-ish time span that we were expecting. I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason that isn't happening is because its primary console of development is obviously PlayStation. It's going to remain that way, and then they effectively have to port it to the other systems as well as PC. Do I think it's going to be an astronomical amount of dev time? But I'm thinking, you know, obviously 6 months to a year could have an impact in that way. Yeah, I don't know at this point if FF7 being on Xbox would do much, but I think it's painfully clear FF7 Trilogy, all being on Steam and being on a new Nintendo console, will do a lot.
Okay, so because one thing I'd say there is that I don't think that FF7 Remake Part 3 is coming to multiplat day one, because I think they've already signed that check with Sony. So I think that ship is already sailed. Like, I don't think we're looking at Part 3 on multiplat day one. I don't think that's probably the case. So, and I feel like there's probably a few other games in the pipeline that Square's already signed deals with that we're still going to see. So I'm not entirely convinced that nothing else is going to be in the pipeline with that. Do you think that PC can get day one at least? I don't know. Probably not, because they probably signed the same deal that they signed before. Ruger, thank you so much for the super chat. Hope I'm not butchering your name, by the way. They better not call eventual trilogy release some new renaming convention instead of FF7 Remake Complete Trilogy to make it clear to judge. They will. They'll come up with another word. Yeah, Rebirth is coming to PC a lot faster than Remake. Yeah, so it's possible. I have this piece of hair sticking out, and it's just driving me insane. I hope it's literally called a Retrilogy, yeah. No, it's gonna be called the Cloud Saga, like the Lightning Saga, Joshy. They're gonna call it the Cloud Saga. They shouldn't call it remake trilogy as they aren't remakes. Timeline sequels are not. I mean, okay, but see, here's the thing, right? One man's remake is another man's sequel. Like we just had like this argument, right? Where I just off the cuff kind of said, "Oh, yeah, as a sequel," and then some people pushed back and they were like, "No, no, no, it's still a remake, right?" And my counterpoint to that was, it still has the perception of being a sequel, regardless of whether it is one or it isn't. So I think that, that perception alone kind of deters people from being able to buy it, at least anecdotally. Like I said, we don't know to what degree that may affect the game, but at the very least, I know when I see people on Twitter and social media ask if they should just hop right into remake, there are people that point them back to the OG. Whether that has any impact or had any impact on the game sales, I can't tell you. But what I can conclude there is that it does seem like the nature of the narrative did not create a environment that allowed newcomers to be as welcomed as they potentially could have otherwise. Vanitas, thank you so much for the super chat. Final Fantasy VII Cloud loses his mind again. Electric Boogaloo. I love the moments where Cloud loses his mind, though, in Rebirth. Those are kind of like the best moments, like the Chapter 9 moments. Right. All right, so, to whatever degree, I can't really say that, like, oh, this definitely, uh, you know, created like a situation where it decreased the sales. But I can say that, in terms of like actually creating a thing that would do it, I don't know. Kai H9, thank you so much for the tip. I think Final Fantasy is in a weird place because they've been the AAA JRPG series since 7 onward. Yeah, 7 even arguably created the AAA game, like, outright. So it's not like they can stop having a huge budget, and the big budget is basically part of the series identity at this point. They're trapped. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're so not wrong, right? Like, yeah, like, it's such a problem, right? Because if you stop making it, like, imagine Final Fantasy 17 looks like Dragon Quest. And I actually think that it should. I actually think that Final Fantasy 17 looking like Dragon Quest is not a bad idea. But there would be like some pushback on it, right? Because Final Fantasy has an identity of it being cutting edge graphics. Actually, going on to that point, Puppy Duck, thank you so much for the super chat. Striking a hopeful tone for the new FF, probably will look a lot more cel shaded and looking like Dragon Quest than as realistic as FF16 or 7R. I mean, Dragon Quest 11 sold 5 million units, right? So Dragon Quest 11 did pretty damn good, right? For not being something aggressively AAA as a Final Fantasy title. That's pretty good. And Dragon Quest 11 probably did not cost nearly as much as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth or Final Fantasy 16. So I think that is something to think about. Daniel, thank you so much for the super chat. Matthew, thank you for the super chat. I am a newcomer, and I know that to me, the timeline stuff of FF7 Remake was basically a big neon sign coming back saying come back after you played FF7. Yeah. That was a common thread that I got from a lot of newcomers that I knew of, personally speaking, like outside of internet discourse, right? who just pick up video games as they come out and don't actively dive into, the discourse. And a lot of them, their reaction was kind of just like, I was really following the plot really well until we got to that last like 2 chapters of the first game. And then I didn't know what was happening, right? And I heard that multiple times again from casual friends who picked it up, and 7R was like their first Final Fantasy or whatever, and that was a common thread. That was a common thread. So I don't know, man. I don't know. I do think that it's tough. This is also the binge watching era of entertainment. It's possible that there are people casually interested but aren't willing to jump in until it's complete. Thank you so much for that, Dude McGuy, because I think you definitely have a good point there too. Is that I do think you do have like another sentiment too, where people are also kind of like, I'll play Re-Trilogy when it all comes out. That's not like an unheard of statement. Again, the fact that we are arguing whether or not it's a sequel or a remake is also what's deterring people away from playing it, because they don't want anything to do with the discourse. After finishing a game, they look for a community. When the community is this split, it's risky to share your opinion, especially as someone who's never played OG. Right. Yeah. I think you're so spot on, Kino. Scott, thank you for the super chat. FF9 rumors, can they fit that all into one game? My understanding of FF9 remake is that it is not a Final Fantasy VII remake. It is a turn-based game that is basically Final Fantasy IX with better graphics and voice acting. That is my understanding of Final Fantasy IX remake. So I do think it can fit in one game. There was an issue I saw with a lot of players jumping into KH3, thinking they need to play the past games before it. Oh, hold on. Did I miss? Oh, KH9, thank you so much for the tip. I just saw it right now. My massive brain strategy for bringing new blood into FF audience: spin-offs. Spin-offs can have lower production values and be even more experimental. Let some indie studio play with the license, a la Necrodancer Zelda. So I actually have been thinking about this too. It's something that me, Blitz, and Baby Seal were discussing recently. And we're like, what's the fastest way to blow up a franchise in 2024? Right? You guys are going to hate this answer. You guys are going to hate this answer. What's the fastest way to blow up a franchise in this modern day? It's a TV series. It's a TV series. Fallout. The Witcher. Season 1. Not 2 and 3. Oh God, not 2 and 3. Cyberpunk. Edge Runners. The Last of Us. Fallout. It works, dude. It works. It sucks, but it works, but it sucks, but it works. Now, that's not to say that those medias suck, because they certainly don't. Edge Runners is a masterpiece. The Last of Us is kind of a masterpiece. Fallout, which I'm watching right now, kind of a masterpiece. Really good television. Really good. Really, really, really good. Sublimely good. Arcane. Yeah, Arcane. Arcane increased people playing League of Legends. Castlevania. Imagine if there was an actual Castlevania game you could buy. Imagine if a Castlevania game existed and you can go buy it. Castlevania probably would have blew Castlevania up too. That's like a straight Konami L, right? Like that's like the biggest L ever, right? The fact that there was no Castlevania that people could go buy on modern hardware when like the show blew up. Like millions of dollars were lost from that. Like even if it was just ports, like updated ports that people could go play, that people could pay you for. Remember that canceled Final Fantasy XIV Netflix show? Sayo, I do remember that canceled FF14 Netflix show, and I'm thinking that was an L that they canceled it in hindsight. So The bigger question here is something that Nicholas14 over on Twitch chat asked, and that is, how do you even do a Final Fantasy Final Fantasy TV series? That's a good question. I don't know. It's tough, right? It's super tough. Anime would be the better option, but the thing is that like it's all risky, right? Inherently speaking, you reach more people with the live action, right? Maybe not as much nowadays, but live action will tend to reach a bigger audience, but that doesn't mean that anime can't reach a pretty sizable, pretty big audience, right? Like Castlevania and Cyberpunk Edge Runners have done really well. Yeah, anime is riskier in that sense, but it's also less expensive too. You need to find a good studio for anime. Right, and I don't trust Square Enix's partnerships. Like, I feel like Square Enix does not pick great partners usually for their stuff. Where is FF9 anime? No, FF9 anime is anime. FF9 anime is anime. But also, too, like, FF9 anime, I know the FF9 anime is being done by a French studio, and they mostly do, like, children's cartoons. So I don't know if that's, like, gonna work. Timothy Chalamet gets cast as a FF protagonist. It would work, man. He could be Tidus, right? He could be Tidus. Although, like, the only, like, canon, like, live action Tidus to me would be like a young Leonardo DiCaprio. That's like the only believable live action Tidus for me. And since that's impossible, no one else can be him. Scarlet Survive. Thank you so much for the super chat. I'm gonna butcher your name here. Alias? How do you say it? I'm so sorry if I butchered your name, man. But Scarlet survives a little longer out of the Crimson Mar, loads up materia, hostages Marlene and Elmira, duels in the church, Tifa's materia negated. Every movement, spell, battle line, mocking Era? Is this what you're predicting will happen in part 3? That would be insane. Elias? Okay. Elias. Sorry. Sorry for butchering your name, and thank you so much for this super chat. That would be cool, though. I'm looking forward to see what they do with that Tifa and Scarlet fight very much. What do you think of an original FF anime with an isekai fanbase? Yeah, I think that's fine, actually. I think they can do an original Final Fantasy, like, anime, right? Like, not connected to anything. Like, they could just call it, like, Final Fantasy something, right? But again, how many people that are already into, like, you know, knee-deep into, like, weeb culture don't know what Final Fantasy is? That's, like, another thing. They kind of already do. Josh Z, thank you so much for the super chat. Josh Z says, one of my friends played Remake anytime we hung out. And then said, I'm going to wait to play the rest of it until it's finished. Part 3 needs to remarket the entire trilogy before it launches. That is a very excellent point. I agree. I think that marketing Part 3 with the idea that, like, Final Fantasy VII Remake in full is finally here, and you can go play it. You can go play the whole thing from start to finish. And also, too, I think that physical and digital, there should be a collector's box of all 3 games that you can buy. And be like, yep. Do you think this is a sequel series, or is it a true retelling within the FS? I don't know. It could be anything. Didn't FF16 have a live action trailer? It did. it did. Um, I do think that doing something like TV wise would be great, but I do think it's difficult because I don't know if it should be an anime or not, and I also think that making the anime blow up might be something of a challenge because Nier Automata also has a really fantastic anime coming out right now, and kinda it's on a break. I don't know what Nier's anime is doing for the game yet, but I don't know if that's like really blowing up. But you definitely can't do a Nier live action. Biggest LSC took was not releasing the twin pack physically. Yeah, that probably they probably should have, but they probably didn't want to reprint more discs. So, but thank you so much for the super chat, Vanitas. I do think that having well, actually no, because actually they should probably save the physical version of for the complete saga, right? So the twin pack being digital may not be a bad idea, but like assuming that the complete trilogy will be like physical, I think that actually because buying the incomplete saga physical would be wouldn't really make as much sense, I think, versus like the complete Blu-ray collection, whatever, you know. That seems to make more sense to me. I think a live action would be the better route in terms of like actually drawing the appeal. The only problem is that like imagine making live action Final Fantasy, how expensive that would be. KH9, thank you so much for the tip. FFTV series would be an anthology series with a variety of animators like Sex, Love, and Robots, with each episode taking place in a completely different game, but centered on events not shown in the game itself. I kind of like that a lot. That would be really cool. That would be like, that would be cool. Right? Like basically like Black Mirror Final Fantasy, you know, Love, Death, and Robot, Sex, Love, or what is it? Love, Death? Is it Love, Death, and Robots or the Sex, Love? I don't know. Either one. Yeah, like it's like that would be cool. That would be cool. That would be. Yeah, I thought it was Love, Death, and Robots. No, I think your idea was better. Sex, Love, and Robot. I think that's a better idea. I think that's you're right. That's cooler. I have this piece of my hair is just like a fucking mess. Every time I get on stream, my hair is a mess. Elias, thank you so much for the super chat again. Beforehand, Scarlet uses Crimson Mar drain / kills all Moogles. Pom poms grow out of nowhere of the machine that now painfully moans Kupo. Thank you. Atlas has really taken Square Enix's place of JRPG prestige for me personally. They kind of, I mean, in a way, yeah. Because when you think of that, like, you know, extremely, you know, like 90 plus JRPG, known for quality, yeah. Because, well, Atlas really hasn't had a bomb yet, right? Like, Atlas really hasn't had a moment where you're like, I don't know about the future of Persona, right? Like, you haven't had that yet with Atlas. You haven't had a moment where, you honestly haven't had a moment yet where, I mean, there really isn't, there hasn't been like a truly bad Persona, like mainline wise. And I know some of you will say there hasn't been a bad Final Fantasy. And you're wrong. I don't know what else to say about that. I just disagree. I think there's definitely been lackluster Final Fantasies, both spin-off and mainline. And yeah. I think that there's everyone who's a fan of a certain Final Fantasy. That's true. Persona 4 is bad. I don't think Persona 4 is like Persona 4 does have like some wonky story stuff, like let's just be honest, but like I don't think that Persona 4 is like what you could call bad next to Persona 3 and 5, right? Like I'd still say that Persona 4 like holds up. It's not like missing features or is like completely hated by any like sizable section of the fandom. Do you think Square Enix will do a remake of Final Fantasy X and X-2? Brandon, first of all, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate that. Um, I don't know, but I don't think I want a remake of. I don't think I want to remake it. I feel like the original 10 is just such a masterpiece, and I feel like it still holds up pretty well. And so I do think that like remaking 10 probably wouldn't be a bad idea, especially if you could fit it all into one game. But I'm not hungering for a 10 remake. They have expressed desire routinely to do a Final Fantasy X-3. Does anyone really want 10-3? Like hardcore want 10-3? I think like point blank, I don't think that like in terms of like what they need to do to turn things around right now. I don't think that the nostalgia, like digging up the nostalgia grave, is like what they need to do. Like, I think that digging up the nostalgia grave is like clearly not working, because what nostalgia grave goes deeper than Final Fantasy VII, right? And if that's not working, then like what is, right? Like if Final Fantasy VII, their most popular IP, is not taking off, then yeah. Audio drama already doesn't seem promising. Yeah, the audio drama is definitely the drama of audio that was made for Final Fantasy X HD. And then the Final Fantasy X 2.5 what do you call it? The Final Fantasy X 2.5 novel, also not what people would consider the best setup for Final Fantasy X-3. So try creating a story for Final Fantasy 17. Okay, so recently I watched an amazing series called Shogun. I don't know if you guys have seen Shogun yet. If you haven't seen Shogun, watch it. Now, even before I watched this series, I was thinking in my head, what is something that works well for Japan and also Westerners love too? Japan. Right? Because Japanese people love Japan, but Western people also love Japan. Ergo, take Final Fantasy 17 back to Japan. Ruger, thank you so much for the super chat. 10-3 isn't happening because of bad sales on 7R2 part. I'm sure they're rethinking remakes. 9R could potentially turn that around. So, but yeah, I'm sure that remakes aren't their primary concern right now. I'm sure that they're probably thinking about making new stuff. Westerners actually not really into Japan. That is so not true, man. That is so not true. I go to the gym, and I go to the gym 5 days a week. I live in fucking Texas. And Texas is a massive weeb capital. I cannot drive my car 5 minutes from this house. I cannot go a mile from my house. In fact, I cannot leave my fucking neighborhood without seeing anime stickers on every car. And I go to the gym. And at the gym, every person there, man and woman, is wearing a fucking anime shirt. They're all so Japan pilled. And going back to Shogun, that was like FX's like largest show ever, dude. Like, or like one of their largest shows ever. The idea that Western people don't love Japan is like made up culture war stuff. Like, everyone in the West pretty much loves Japan. Point blank. Final Fantasy X, right? The best-selling, like, second best-selling FF of all time is a Final Fantasy game that takes place that was and in locations that were inspired by various places in East Asia, including Japan and including other, nations around there. And so if I'm making FF17, I say FF17 goes to Japan. It's like, maybe like Edo era Japan, maybe before that even. And crazy there isn't a katana wielding FF protagonist. Rigger, again, thank you for the super chat. I think you're right. You ever watch Blue Eye Samurai? Blue Eye Samurai is amazing. Yes, I watched Blue Eye Samurai. I'm obsessed with that show. That show is phenomenal. If you guys haven't watched Blue Eye Samurai, do yourself a favor and go watch that shit right now, tonight. I don't care what's going on. Cancel your wedding. Cancel the funeral. Go watch Blue Eye Samurai. It is baller. FF17 should also expand the Samurai class and evolve it into a Shogun class. Unique to the game. That would be awesome. Vanitas, thank you so much for the super chat and that very valuable contribution, because I think you are cooking with that. So I would put a twist on it, right? So you could actually like kind of like thematically make it, because you know how Stormblood, like for those of you who play Final Fantasy 14, like has like those types of like themes of like, of like essentially like westernization and like this imperial Western nation coming in, and like essentially East meets West. And I think having that type of story in Final Fantasy, where, it's also supposed to be this franchise that appeals globally, would be really cool, right? And I think the coolest way to represent that would be to have a protagonist that who has a weapon that would symbolize both Eastern culture and Western culture. And I could not think of a better idea or a more Final Fantasy idea than a Final Fantasy protagonist who has a gunblade that is a katana and a gun. Gunblade katana. FF17. Okay, chat really liked that one. Chat really liked that one. That's what I would do. That's what I would do. Yeah, Vice also has a gunblade katana, so it's already a thing out there, right? So yeah, I would kind of make it. I would kind of make it like that. You said FF14 gunblade lore is sick. Yeah, it is. What's funny is that in FF14 they do remark the stark difference between the gun and gunblade coming from two different cultures made, right? And so I think that like I think that like Final Fantasy has like this beautiful meaning behind it anyway of like East meets West, like the whole world kind of like joining together and culturally, you know, melding together. And so I feel like symbolizing that in a weapon that is already uniquely and powerfully Final Fantasy, and even centering the story around that. Gunblade is literally East meets West conjunction. Yeah, it is. Right? And so yeah, that's what I would do. I would center, I would make FF17, I would discuss I would like thematically kind of center it around like the idea of like, you know, kind of like imperialism and like, you know, the West kind of coming in. And then like I would have a party from people who are basically all over this game's world. So it'd be from people who are from wherever the game is taking place, and then people from the Imperial Nation and other nations outside of it. And, you know, and they would all come together, and through their friendship, they would show that we're all kind of the same inside, and we're going to kill either God or a man that wants to become God for reasons. And he'll do a gunblade, and he'll use a gunblade, which would be hot take. Give us Agni's philosophy as FF17. So Scott, thank you for the super chat. I don't disagree one bit. I think that Agni's philosophy, like, this is gonna get me in trouble. I'm just gonna say it anyway, because I don't give a fuck. But like, I think Agni's philosophy like was cooler from a visual standpoint than like what we actually got with like 15 and 16. Like I actually feel like Agni's philosophy like is like really what they like the aesthetic that like, I mean, of course, like with 15 it already had an aesthetic, but like actually 15's like the final game aesthetic of 15 is not as cool as like the aesthetic of the trailers from Versus. So I feel like Agni's philosophy's like style was like really cool. I know people are going to clip that and hate on me, but I do feel like Agni's philosophy was cooler. Yeah, Agni's philosophy ended up becoming Forspoken, but then also too, Forspoken's art direction wasn't that cool either. The final game, because the final game didn't really end up looking like Agni's philosophy, right? Like the tech that was in Agni's philosophy, or the crystals, or the summons, or anything like that. Where in Texas are you at? Let me just dox myself real quick. Yeah, no. The final game didn't even look like Forspoken's announcement trailers. Yeah, that's true. Well, here's what happened with Forspoken, right? What happened with Forspoken is, and they've kind of talked, well, not people inside Square, but people who have worked on Forspoken, like, who have like one of the writers, he even kind of like said that like, yeah, like Forspoken was like being worked on, and then they kind of ditched everything that Forspoken was supposed to be and just like started over, pretty much, like halfway through development, and decided that it was going to be about something else. And so they essentially just dumped everything out and started over. So that's how like you like wonder like how's like some like amazing writers like Amy Hennig and other people worked on Forspoken. Well, a lot of their work was wrote down, and then like someone inside of Square came in and they were just like, yeah, actually we're not doing that, we're doing something else. Yeah, and then they still kind of advertised it with names like Amy Hennig's name and stuff like that. And yeah, that's just like really unfortunate. Chat, I'm gonna let you know right now, for all of you go woke, go broke people, Bring that shit to my chat, get banned. Let's try that. We don't do culture war shit here. We don't do that here. We bathe. We wash our balls in this chat. We go outside. We have friends of all walks of life. We socialize with our neighbors. We don't do that here. Thanks. YouTube chat. I mean, Twitch chat, you guys are always cool. we wear deodorant. Yeah. Yeah, we don't do that. But also, like, there's so much wrong with a game like Forspoken. To think that like that's the reason that game failed is like utterly ridiculous. Like that is like not even like 1% of why that game sucked balls. That's like not even like half of a percent of anything that's like wrong with that game. Do you think Square Enix should adopt Atlus's approach to multi-platform releases with their games? Oh yeah, I do think they should. I think that Sega actually forced Atlus to do that. Imagine Alex, thank you so much for the super chat. Make Brave Fencer Musashi great again. Based. But yeah, so we're in a pickle here with Square and like what FF17 is gonna be. I knew I'd get a yes from you guys for sure on this, but I'll pose it anyway because maybe I won't get a yes. But like, should Final Fantasy 17 like be a stylized game? Rick Scott, you never answered my question, Prince. Which one was it? Did I miss it? Was it in the super chat? Show it to me again. Face it to me again. I'll answer your question. What do you mean by stylized? I mean not aggressively AAA. Not aggressively AAA. Like not not 16 or 7 Rebirth fidelity, but like should FF17 look like Dragon Quest? Not like literally like Dragon Quest. But the scale and total like stylisticness of like a Dragon Quest. What do you think of the idea of the FF anime title? That time I got reincarnated as a Moogle. That'd be great, dude. That would actually be a great little isekai. How about Tales of Arise style? Yeah, I like Tales of Arise style. Like, I don't have like a specific style in mind necessarily when I ask this. I just say Dragon Quest XI as an example because it's also Square. But think of the art styles of WoW, Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest shading in general has staying power over time. Yeah, for sure. I only say this because I imagine it's significantly cheaper than making ultra realism simulators, right? It would get games out a lot quicker too, right? It'd be cheaper, faster, and Yeah. And they wouldn't have to sell 100 bajillion units. Works for Zelda, right? Like, works for Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. I feel like mainline FF is already locked into AAA style, and anything less will anger people, right? The best examples would be either FF9, Ivalice, or Crystal Chronicles art style, the semi-realism and very artsy styles of 7 and 8, and older Amano painting stuff is harder to do, right? Yeah, I don't think that, like, I don't know how well something with, like, FF9's visuals would do in today's market, because honestly, FF9's visuals, even at the time FF9 released, was kind of like made it a little bit less popular than 7 and 8. So I don't know. I actually don't know. A lot of people also are not like fans of like the Ivalice art styles either. So, I like the Ivalice art styles though too. I'd love SC to did a design like Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. Thank you again, Scott, for the super chat. Yeah, something like that. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. I don't know if that's like what they should necessarily do. I don't know if like continuing to make something aggressively AAA is something they should do. But right, like I'm just like thinking, right? Because I imagine that Square Enix is thinking. And I imagine that they're thinking, what do we do? Right? Because Rebirth hit 92 on Metacritic. Very beloved game. Many people, myself included, would say it's one of the best Final Fantasy games ever made, ever. But it's still not enough, right? And I think that most of it comes down to the marketing and the perception of the game's entry levelness, if that makes sense. Like, but yeah, it's hard, but they really need to take a risk in today's gaming climate. That's a scary move, right? But here is the thing, though, right? Like, taking a risk and then like, but AAA development is so expensive. How do you take a risk? Right? Like, it's hard to gamble with $200 million. But that's kind of like what you're doing when you're developing a AAA game, is that you're gambling with money that big. The 7 Rebirth and 16 not meeting expectation conversations remind me of how Spider-Man 2 did really well, but still didn't hit Sony's sales goals. The industry is unsustainable these days. I mean, Spider-Man 2 is like the prime example of everything wrong with AAA. And I'm not saying that Spider-Man 2 is a bad game. In fact, I'm saying kind of the opposite in a way. I'm saying that like a game like Spider-Man 2 has to sell 7 million copies. 7.2 million was the exact number at full price, not to profit, not to be considered a success, to break even. 7.2 million copies to break even. Dog. It's ridiculous. FF has always been a forerunner in graphics and style. Keep the cartoony style for other SCRPGs. Rockstar, thank you so much for the super chat. It has been. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is that with the way AAA is looking right now, does FF have other options? Right? Like that's what I'm really trying to say. And I think it does have other options. Like I wouldn't be mad if Final Fantasy, 17 came out and it looked like, how Rebirth is or 16 do. You got to in some ways respect the irony that the irony that Rebirth is being squashed by the legacy of AAA gaming, seeing as its progenitor FF7 OG is the catalyst for the entire concept of AAA gaming and its association with the increased development costs. Oh my god, Crossy, like I was like literally going to put that like in my script, like for like the video where I was going to talk about this stuff, and like you like stole the words like right out of my head. Yeah. Yeah. Like FF7 essentially made AAA, and now Rebirth is like getting like crushed by it. Like it is kind of like it's kind of painfully ironic in a way that is happening. Like the thing that FF7 OG gave birth to. But that's also like in a way too, it's kind of funny, right? Like with each AAA game, we're almost pursuing again, everyone's pursuing the thing that FF7 OG created. So, meta. Too much adult theme FF nowadays. The original games had pixel art, making it a pixel art style, making it imaginative and child friendly. It's too graphic. Dragon Quest nails it. Imagine Alex, thank you so much for the super chat. I don't mind the adult theme, but yeah, I do think that Dragon Quest's style is good. I don't think that Final Fantasy should look like Dragon Quest, but I think that making something that is within the realm of what Dragon Quest 11 visually is like not a bad idea. Making something stylized and short would potentially be a good idea. And then you have Sega with Yakuza celebrating 1 million copies sold in a week. Right. Because here is the thing though, right? Yakuza, Persona, those games are not AAA video games. They're AA video games, and they reuse a ton of assets. Well, Yakuza definitely does. Reuses a ton of assets. They make smart use of it. And they have a loyal base, and they continue to make games for that loyal base. And that loyal base does grow a little bit, and it has grown quite a bit with 7 and 8. But they have a very sustainable business. Like, what RGG does is really sustainable. What Persona, what Atlas does is incredibly sustainable, right? You guys know how many people work on like an average AAA game? It's like 400 people, right? Do you know how many people worked on Persona 5? Depending on the point of its development, at lowest, it was 40 people. At the highest, it was 70 people. Right? So they're using less than a quarter of the number of people. And 300 people are managers? Yeah. So they're using less than a quarter of the people, right? So less than 100 people. And think about how much more sustainable that is compared to 300 or 400 people, if not thousands. Like there are definitely games that have reached over 1,000 in, like, can we even find that? Biggest game team sizes? Is that something I can find? No, it just says anywhere from 100 to 500 people. Because I wanted to see like if there was a list of like top dev team sizes. If anyone can find like a list of like like actual numbers on that stuff, I'd be really curious to see. But yeah, that would be really cool. I think if they could make something like that. So, how would you feel if an FF game used stylized graphics of No Rest for the Wicked? That'd be cool. BG3 was like 1,500. Yeah, that's not surprising. 1,600 developers, a total of 2,000 people worked on Red Dead 2. Amazing. Now think about Grand Theft Auto 6. That game is probably going to have like 4 or 5,000 people that worked on it. Like it's probably going to be something like that. Yeah, like each person is in charge of an NPC. Like that's like how it's going to be like. I mean, like it's going to be like that ridiculous, but I mean, there's already rumors that GTA 6 is going to cost $1 billion to $2 billion to make, right? So, Rithy, thank you so much for the super chat. By the time FF7 Part 3 comes out, gaming industry won't be so congested, or they could add a BTS member as a secret character. Then sales will dramatically boost. And it'll introduce so many new fans. Yeah, there you go. There you go. You figured it out. We need to put BTS in the Final Fantasy. And there you go. What else do you need to do? Yeah, but Rockstar can milk GTA 6 online to make its cost back. I don't even know if they need like GTA Online to make their cost back, because I think that GTA 6 can make GTA 6 will probably make its money back on just like people just buying it, like at full price. Full price. I think GTA 6 will do like it'll probably do something insane like 20 or 30 million in 1 week. That's how big I feel like the release is going to be. I don't know if that's even possible, but that's how it feels like, right? Yeah, there are 2,944 people in the credits for Baldur's Gate 3. Almost 3,000 people in the credits for Baldur's Gate 3. One thing about BG3 too is not BG3 2. That would be interesting. BG3 2, and it's like Lizelle, Shadowheart, and what's her name? Karlach. At a pop concert. No. But like one thing about BG3 as well is that the developers kind of talk about how much creative freedom they got and how they didn't have the pressure of shareholders on them, and how that makes their business sustainable, right? Because one of the things about being a publicly traded company is that you make a game, right? You make Baldur's Gate 3. Suppose that Larian would be publicly traded in this example. You make it, and then you make Baldur's Gate 4. And then if Baldur's Gate 4 doesn't sell as well as Baldur's Gate 3, then they're like, well, you guys fell off. You didn't provide infinite growth. You made less money. You made $2 less. Because last time you made $2 billion and $2, and this time you just made $2 billion flat. So you made less money. Your business isn't growing. You're just doing the same thing. Or even worse than that, is that you made $2 billion this year, and you only made $2 billion this year as well. You're stagnating. You're not growing. You make the same $2 billion every year. you're virtually broke. But that's the way, operating in a publicly traded company works. You have to pursue infinite growth. There is no such thing as, well, we made enough to profit and pay off all our employees and continue business and make the next thing. It's a really successful product. Did we make $2 billion in $2 or just $2 billion? Doesn't matter, right? Because if there's no growth, did I major in finance? No. So if there's a finance major in here who can own me, go ahead. But that is my understanding of the way this works. Shareholder capitalism sucks. We need to go back to stakeholder capitalism. Yeah. Because this shit is ass. And it affects most things like this, right? Because it's why every company has to squeeze every last dollar out of you humanly possible. Red Dead Redemption 2 has 7,315 people in the credits. That is the most insane thing ever. But anyway, that's AAA, right? So it's like, versus something like, if we look at, I mean, yeah, but I guess, too, the people that are working on the game and the credits are not always because not every person credited is necessarily an active employee on the game. So of that 7,300, only 2,000 people might actually be employees. So that idea of infinite growth with these giant conglomerate gaming companies with investors that know nothing about the industry other than short-term gains will eventually crash the current idea of mainstream gaming. Indies will be fine. Capcom will be fine. Nintendo will be fine. Very fucking fine. If you look at the recent sales, yeah, Nintendo will be fine. But see, that's also why Nintendo is smart. Nintendo is not pursuing any of this, you guys. Nintendo has bowed out of this race. And Nintendo saw it all the way back during the Wii generation, right? Back then. They were like, game costs just keep going up. And we keep paying more for these graphics. And it's not really making games better. And now we've trained customers that graphics have to get aggressively better and look more realistic. And so we're going to have to keep spending more and more money. And that pursuit will never end ever. Because when PlayStation 6 comes around or PlayStation 7 comes around, you have to spend more money. And more money, and more money. And the margins get smaller, right? Well, not without increasing the price of the games exponentially, which is what's already happening. The time for stylized graphics is here. Point blank. The time, and not just stylized graphics, because you can make a really expensive stylized graphics game. You can make Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact is not a cheap game. That's a very expensive video game. And Tears of the Kingdom is also very expensive. However, Tears of the Kingdom is less expensive than it would be if that game was made with graphics that look like The Last of Us 2. It cost them. The Wii U was a necessary step, and it really cost Nintendo. But now look, they're really thriving in their own market, and they created with increasing audience year on year. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, what Sony was doing with their AAA games is great, and I do love it. I love me a God of War, but at the same time, dude, 5 to 7 years $300 million, 1,000 plus people. We can't keep this going forever, dude. It's not possible. And then you want the game to look even better. You want the game to look even better next generation. Right? Like, come the fuck on, dude. Where does it end? Where does it stop, bro? Yeah, because Nintendo has an insane amount of IPs under the belt that will pretty much sell themselves because they have a wider appeal and people buy them no matter what. I mean, that's true. But then also, too, you can look at Breath of the Wild and, Zelda actually wasn't that huge like before, right? Like Final Fantasy was way bigger than Zelda. And then Breath of the Wild came out, and now like you put like Final Fantasy next to Zelda, and it's a joke, right? Like Zelda crushes Final Fantasy in terms of audience. And the highest selling Zelda game prior to Breath of the Wild was Twilight Princess. And Twilight Princess sold 8 million units. And that was like the highest selling Zelda game. That was like a record breaking like new high for Zelda. And then because like most of them are like 3 to 5 million, right? And then Breath of the Wild came out and sold 30 million. All right. So Zelda actually was like kind of like, I mean, kind of like a black sheep franchise in a way within Nintendo, because even though it sold like kind of okay. It just was not touching like what Mario or Pokemon or those types of things were like really doing. And so with Zelda, they did kind of look at it like, Zelda's not like a huge deal, right? Because most of the time they were selling like 3 to 5 million on Zelda. And Zelda cost exponentially more than most of the other titles and took way more time to develop. But yeah, and then they made Breath of the Wild, and then Zelda. And yeah, I think also too that's why I'm such a huge like stan of Retrilogy's combat, and like kind of pushing on that gameplay formula even more, because I do think that when you look at the gaming landscape, there is actually not another game that you can find that plays like Retrilogy. And I think that that's actually really important. This is why PS Pro pisses me off. When does it end? Thank you so much for the super chat, Scott. Yeah, exactly. Like, when does it end? When do we say video games look good enough? Sorry, my sinus is kind of. When do we say video games look good enough? Like, when does that? And like at this point, I don't even want games to look better. I just want them to run at 60 frames per second. That's all I want. Like, it can look ugly as sin at this point. Like, this is the fire that OGFF7 started. It is, and that is why this is the most ironic conversation in like the world to be having right now. Right? Games didn't need to look better than MGS4, based in objectively correct opinion. We did not need to go beyond MGS4. That was good enough. That was good enough. I really like, other than like, being able to render textures at like a higher resolution, I really don't think we needed to go like beyond the PS3 visually. Like, I think you can make like textures cleaner, but like other than that, I don't think we needed to like go like way beyond way beyond like what PS3 and 360 looked like. Like, I look at like Final Fantasy 13 still, even to this day, and I'm like, We really did not need to make video games look much better than Final Fantasy 13. Like, that was like already good enough. That was already good enough. Did you see that interesting fact that went around Twitter last week, by the way? RE Games attribute like over half their series lifetime sales to post RE7. Capcom have made a killing with the RE engine and have revamped their modern workflow. Also, RE7 has sold 1 million copies every year for the past 7 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Square Enix is not Capcom. Square Enix is not Capcom. Square Enix is not Capcom. They are not. They are so not. And see, that's another thing too, right? Is that they have RE Engine. And they continue to use RE Engine. And every company and every employee in that company knows how to use RE Engine, right? And here is the thing. They all know RE Engine, and they continue to build on it. Square continues to pump and dump engines, right? Like, we had Luminous, right? Which was used for a grand total of 2.5 games. I say half because Final Fantasy XIV, lesser known fact, uses an early build of Luminous that they basically like stole off, and then they revamped it, and they like Frankensteined it together to work for A Realm Reborn. Yeah, and then you have Final Fantasy 16, which I don't know if it's like, it's never really was confirmed if it was using a brand new engine or if it's an offshoot of 14's or what it was. But we know it's not Luminous and it's not Unreal. So, yeah. But also, yeah, I would say that at the very least, whatever they're doing with 16's engine, at least it came out in the game. Yeah, I think they call it like Radic Engine or whatever. It's like a brand new thing. It's actually not an offshoot of 14's engine. Dragon's Dogma 1 sold an extra million before Dragon's Dogma 2 came out. Wow. Wow, that's actually insane. An extra million a month before DD2. Wow. That's... And you know what? Think about that, right? Did Final Fantasy VII Remake, like, did that sell an extra million before Rebirth came out? No. And that's our problem. Scott, thank you for the super chat. RE7 for PSVR versus RE7 and Village for PSVR versus Monsters of the Deep. Yeah. That's another thing too, is that they come out with like the VR versions of their games. And those also sell really well. And also Resident Evil games are on every platform ever. Capcom has been on fire since Monster Hunter World last generation. Just everything about everything they've done has been gold among a decade of banger titles. Yeah, 100%. Vanitas, thank you for the super chat. If Capcom revives Breath of Fire and it takes off, FF will be in trouble. Yeah. That would be cool. That would be cool. I'm actually really excited to see Capcom like go back to some of their older IPs and like do some stuff with them. Which I think is a thing that's happening, unless that's a fever dream of mine. But yeah, I do think like I'm really excited for that prospect. RE Engine, however, did show some limitations with DD2. Yeah. I don't think RE Engine like in like a big world like Dragon's Dogma 2 really works all that great. Like, I feel like it's actually kind of oof, you know? Yeah, so after what Capcom did to Breath of Fire, they better never touch that franchise again. I mean, You know, Capcom nowadays is so good. So good. RE3 came out a week before FF7R, but has sold the same amount, and it was the weakest RE game recently. Right. And remember, FF sales used to dwarf RE, right? Like, RE could not stand next to Final Fantasy whatsoever in the sales department, right? Because like chat mentioned earlier that like RE2 selling like 5 million. Well, that was like what FF9 sold, and that was like the least. That was like the one of the lowest performing FFs on the PS1. So yeah, that's Capcom is a beast. Very good. Thank you for the super chat. Capcom PC is now their most profitable platform. Man, that's crazy. Their most profitable platform is PC. Square, what are you doing, bro? What are you doing? Yeah, it's PC and by a lot. What? What? And that's the thing too, right? Like even Helldivers 2. Helldivers 2 is doing like immaculately well because it's also on PC. Half of Elden Ring and Cyberpunk sales are on PC. Yeah. See, that's the thing, right? Like Square should be like getting a Sony check for the console exclusivity and making these games on PC day one. Like even if they had to take a smaller Sony check, I think that would actually be like not a bad idea if that's what things are doing. Yeah, considering where Capcom was at the tail end of the 7th generation, they're embracing the PC. They're embracing a PC as a platform, and the embracing of the RE engine for like every single project, along with releasing consistent quality games. Capcom have thrived the past 10 years. Yep. I don't want to say it's easy, but I don't think figuring it out is that crazy either. Like, it's not unknown. How big is the Sony check? We don't have firm numbers, but if I had to like ballpark like what I imagine the Sony check to be, I would say on the low end probably 30 million, on the high end 70, right? If it's 100 million, that would be great. I don't know. But I would say it's probably somewhere between like 30 and 70 million. I don't really have anything to back that up. That's just that was revealed to me by God in a dream. The source is that I made it the fuck up. It's funny how all businesses units use different engines. Yeah, that's another thing too. All the business units use different engines, and that goes back to the statement where that goes back to we talked about this. Let's actually pull this shit up. See, is it gonna come up? It came up. Let's go. Let's talk about Mr. Takashi here. Now, one thing about this gentleman in particular is that he is his biases, let's just say, have impacted some of his reporting before. So I do recommend taking him reporting this with a grain of salt. He does work for Bloomberg, and so it's not like he's just some guy and it's some rumor, but he has been shown to let his feelings and ideas on some things affect the quality of reporting. And someone tries to call him out here. I don't think this is like the greatest example of it, because these aren't actually mutually exclusive statements that are being made here. So, because what he basically said is, fuck, I have this cropped. There we go. Let's look at it like this. These aren't mutually exclusive statements because he said that Final Fantasy 16 did not meet the high end of company expectations. And he was using this to say that, well, Kiryu said that the achievement was in line with our expectations. And those aren't conflicting statements, right? Because you have a high end expectation and a low end expectation. And to say that it's within expectations means that it landed between what the highest thing was and what the lowest expectation was. So it was in between their highest expectation and their lowest expectation. So I don't think that this particular example necessarily does. He said, except they do when he invented words that were never stated. Nowhere in the transcripts does it mention anything about Kiryu talking about the high-end expectations, let alone failing to meet it. Completely fabricated quote. I don't know, right? And then here, this is another thing too, is that Daniel Ahmad is very very trustworthy journalist, and he basically is just saying, yep, unfortunate the recent FF games are selling notably less than their prior titles. And I think he retweeted it as well, if I recall correctly. Did he unretweet it? No, he didn't. My bad. It's right there. So in conclusion, I don't fucking know. But and take it all with a grain of salt, because the person has been basically accused of some biased reporting before. And I am just putting this out here because you can basically make your own mind up on whether or not Takashi's reporting here is accurate. But he does work for Bloomberg again, so he's not just some guy, essentially. Is Takashi the only source for these statements from the call? Unfortunately, yes. The only public source we have from this call. So take with it what you will. This studio, what Microsoft shut down, I've never even heard of the game studio before. The game looks more like a cheap animated indie game. If I look, are you talking about Hi-Fi? Oh no, Hi-Fi is cool, bro. That is not the take, my guy. Hi-Fi is cool. We play JRPGs, and I would say the animation and like that is better than like a lot of JRPGs actually. So anyway, so we'll just go over like what was reported here, and now that I've kind of clarified the biases and stuff like that, and that you can kind of take this however you want to take it, feel about it however you want to. Here is what he's had to say about what was on the call. Square Enix FF16, Square Enix said FF16 sales fell short of expectation. Initial momentum was in line with expectations, but the game failed to reach its fiscal year goal as its momentum slowed. No updates from the sales number last announced at 3 million. Again, whether this was said on the call or not, I have a sneaking suspicion that it's still probably the truth either way, right? Because if the game had reached 5 million by now, I feel like we would know. I feel like we would have known like around the launch of the DLC, right? Like that would have been made clear. And so the fact that we still don't know is probably not that good. When games are selling well, you know. There's not a single game that you find out about that sold bad, and it's like or how should I say this? You don't know, like, it's not unheard of, like, what am I trying to say? Basically, if games sell good, you know about it. They tell you. And if it hits targets, they tell you. And they're proud of it. And they post it because it looks good and it's good for investors. They don't go yelling from the rooftop if it didn't sell. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about it at all. Right? Because again, if you're a publicly traded company with shareholders and you don't have a W, you have an L, you're fucked. That's bad, right? That makes your stocks go down, right? Companies are a lot more eager to share data on hard data on good news. Right. The better the news is, the more hard data that we get. Right? Because they just throw it up there. They're like, we did this, this, and this. So again, questionable source, but like whether that's true or not, I probably would have predicted that either way. And I mean, like, he did sit in on the call, so I don't think he like made this up or anything. But the wording and such could be filtered through his bias, as seen before. And yeah, so again, I do feel like that is true. Again, we haven't seen a 5 million announcement from 16 yet. I'm willing to bet it's at 4 million. Like if I had to take a guess, 16's at 4 million, like maybe 4.5 million by now, and 7 Rebirth is at like 3. Like that's my assumption again. Pikmin 4 will have sold out within the same year. Pikmin 4, a series that has arguably always been a niche one within Nintendo. That's the modern state of FF. Right. We're now at a state where Pikmin has outgrown Final Fantasy. It is pretty rough, man. Like some people like were like, oh, you fucking clickbaiter, because I put on my thumbnail like, this is really bad. It kind of is. Right? Like, this is not like a good like position that like we're in right now. FF7 Rebirth sales fell short of expectations. Initial momentum didn't reach an internal target. No sales numbers to share. Again, that's been verified by multiple analysts. That's been verified by like Daniel Ahmad and like a couple of other analysts. So yeah, I don't think that that one's a stretch of the imagination. No one is saying anything there that makes me question that statement. So very true. That goes with most things. If I'm waiting a whole month to hear back from a prospective employer, odds are I didn't get the job. Nightbreaker, thank you for the super chat. Yeah, that tends to be how things go. The longer you wait to hear things, the typically the worse things are in that situation. True Trophies has 65,271 users with 16. That is a decent a decent about, I reckon it maps to 7 million compared to Sony games. Like, I'm confused what you mean by that. Imagine Alex, thank you for the super chat. We in a recession will not get better for long. That's another thing too. That's another thing. I kind of at some point wonder, people being a lot more conservative on how they spend their money on games now, if even the price of games unironically is causing them to sell less, which is inadvertently causing less profit. This kind of like goes back to a conversation that me and Crossy actually were having earlier, where we were talking about like the 100-hour game, and like this was on Twitter, and I was kind of like thinking in my head, I didn't share this idea with you, Crossy, but I was also thinking like, does the 100-hour game becoming so commonplace now also bottleneck video game sales? Because you buy one game and it lasts you for so ungodly long. Does the average person who in this economy is working harder than ever, has less free time than ever, and when they do, they play their favorite series, and their favorite series, takes 100+ hours to finish, like a lot of these games do nowadays. Is that creating a situation where games are so long now, you need to buy less of them in general to be satisfied? I'm kind of thinking about that. Like, absolutely, the push for game hours is a result of EA and Ubisoft pushing checklist open worlds as more value for your dollars during the 7th console generation. Anyways, it's a tired idea, right? I think game hours and the value of a game need to stop being conflated. I understand why they're conflated. They're conflated because people are spending $70 and we're in like an insane economy right now that everything is so expensive. People's wages are not going up and people are also getting laid off. And so the idea that when you spend that $70, you want to get as much satisfaction as humanly possible, it makes sense. It really does. The issue comes in, however, with those 100-hour games, where if we were to actually objectively look at those 100-hour games under a microscope, a lot of them are fantastic, generation defining. However, not all 100 of those hours are good hours. They're not all built evenly. A lot of those 100 hours are 10 out of 10, yes. But a lot of those hours are not a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 experience. Hell, a lot of those 100 hours are not even a fucking 8 out of 10 experience. They're kind of cheeks a lot of times. And that's because to make a 100-hour game, you need to inevitably pad out places of that game. As we said on Twitter DMs, even beloved JRPGs like Persona could have at least a dozen hours shaved off by removing needless paths. Yeah, exactly, right? But here's the thing, though, too. As a developer, why would you? Right? Like, if you could make a 40-hour Persona game with, that really worked, you wouldn't do it. Because people would be like, oh my god, it's half the length of all the other Persona games. Or it's like a third the length of Persona 5. This is terrible. You couldn't do it, right? So, and not that I think the Persona works well for people being long. So I don't know if Persona is necessarily the example that people would resonate the most with. But I do think that there's a lot of games that if they weren't 100 hours plus hours, that they'd probably be better games, right? This was a beef that I had with the first 7R in particular, where I thought that I thought that if 7R was like a 25-hour game instead of a 35, 40-hour game, that it probably would have been better, and I probably would have done a replay like every 6 months. So ironically, I probably would have ended up playing, and I mean, I beat 7R like 4 times, but like I probably would have replay that game more frequently if it was like a 25-hour game. And there were so many sections of that game that probably didn't need to actually exist. And also, too, I think that 16 in particular, I think 16 even more so, actually. If 16 was a shorter game, I would have enjoyed 16 tremendously more. I think 16 would have been a lot better. Rebirth would be better as a 50-hour game, so much needless padding and stuff. I mean, the good thing about Rebirth, to its credit, is that Rebirth can be a 50-hour game if you skip through all the side content. And what's nice about Rebirth is that actually you're not under-leveled if you do skip through all that side content. You can still do it all, like without doing a single side quest. Because I know some people during their review playthroughs did finish Rebirth in around that time without doing as much side content. And you can do it. Yeah, it took me around 54 hours the second go around, no side content. If you do MSQ only, yeah. So at the very least, I can say to Rebirth's defense, it can be a 50-hour game. But yeah, it's still quite a lot. And yeah, I think that 16 would have benefited huge from being like a 25-hour, 30, probably 25 to 30-hour game. It would have benefited a lot because there was a lot of downtime between icon fights that is just, you're not doing anything. Okay, thank you for the super chat. Capcom sells 10 to 20-hour RE games every 1 to 2 years, even in this recession. So I don't think the bad economy arguments explains FF's bad sales. That's also true. Yeah. 100%. 100%. And RE is only doing better and better and better. Did I platinum Rebirth? No, I didn't platinum Rebirth. And the more I thought about it, the more I decided that I'm not going to platinum Rebirth because I want to continue to like the game. And I realized that there's a negative relationship for me with trying to platinum games and eventually just hating the fucking game. Which is why I don't platinum stuff. I do the content in a game that I want to do, and then I turn the game off. And if I want to play more of the game, I start a new file. But like every time I like platinuming stuff, it like at some point during a platinum, like you do not like the game anymore. At least that's my experience. Like I know some people do it, but like getting all the collectibles of something and like doing all the content in a game that's just like, are you really enjoying getting that platinum most of the time? Like that's kind of like my question. I'm not knocking people who do pursue platinums, by the way. This is just how I personally maintain a healthy relationships with games. Is that I think that if I do go for the platinum a lot of times, then I'm going to create an unhealthy relationship with the game that will make me no longer like it. So yeah, that's why I tend to try to not platinum games because now this is like the most earth-shattering news ever. Like this is like, you guys aren't prepared for this. This is going to blow your mind. Contrary to what you guys may have thought, I thought this game blew up too. Apparently it didn't, and I'm just devastated by it. I'm really worried that we're not getting a sequel, but Foam Stars, you guys, did not meet expectations. I know. It's tough. It's tough. it's hard to believe, right? Like, I was so sure, like 10 million day one, easily, right? And it's crazy too, because if you think about it, every person that you know plays Foam Stars. So why didn't it do well? If Foam Stars had some more anime women in a gotcha system, then it would be making bank. Perhaps. Don't worry, it'll reach 10 million tomorrow. Foam Stars was free with PS Plus. You know, that's actually kind of funny because you literally could not give Foam Stars away. Like, take Foam Stars is free, and everyone's like, nah, I'm good. I don't know, man. That's kind of sad. I like the main girl with the pink hair. She was cute, like the main kind of like character they used to advertise it. I think Crossy's kind of right. Crossy was cooking. They just need to put on like they just need to have like some anime girls in there, and like you pay like $20 to like pull a character or something. Uh, the weird part is it wasn't supposed to be fun to play. In my experience, it was cheeks. It was doo doo. Donkey doo doo. Actually, it was really bad. I actually don't know what people were talking about because I heard some people saying that it's actually fun to play after they played it at Summer Games Fest or whatever. I played the beta and it was not okay. Actually, it was donkey doo doo bad to me. Like I found it to be an incredibly unintuitive game. Yeah, it felt sluggish, dude. There was an idea for a good game in Foam Stars, but it did not release with Foam Stars. Like the surfing ability on the foam, right? The physics were actually very realistic, which made it like bad actually. Because if you weren't on like a downward slope on the foam, then you couldn't like skate across it. But the end result of that was that like half the time your movement was like really sluggish. Like if you were going up a slope, for example, the physics were realistic, so you couldn't just surf up the slope. Like it's not video game physics actually. It's like just real physics. And that actually was like the thing that like made me like I hate this game. Should have been more gamey, yeah. Yeah, it was really weird. It was this mismatch of like of cartoon physics and real physics, and it wasn't intuitive, right? Like you know how like Smash Bros uses very like cartoon physics, and so you kind of like you build up like this internal feeling of like how Smash like physics work and how they should work. That never happens with almost said Splatoon with Foam Stars. So or at least in my experience with it. So I didn't really like it. Remains confident that 16 can achieve its goal over the 18-month sales plan. The 18-month sales plan, like, okay, so I remember the 18-month sales plan, like when Yoshi P first announced it. What is this 18-month sales plan? Because it does not feel like they've really been doing anything. Right? They talked about the 18-month sales plan before, but like, what is it? Like, other than like the DLC? Like, was it the 14 collab? The 14 collab that came way too late for anyone to care? The 14 collab that should have been there, like, Probably the DLC and ending the PC release. Yeah, I guess so. I guess so, but like the PC release and the DLCs, but like Koji teased there may be more stuff beyond the DLCs. We have gotten so far, so I imagine that's what it is. We'll likely get more DLC after the PC release. Okay, I hope that it is playable Jill or some Jill stuff in there because um that is like almost undeniably at this point the thing that people are wanting to see and that it feels like we're getting denied from. And so I feel like Jill being playable in some form or some type of content focused around Jill is universally the most demanded thing. So I'm hoping that's what they do. I do not think the PC release of will help 16. It's kind of hard to imagine, but I think it'll sell like 1 million. Well, maybe under 1 million, but I think it might. 1 million is probably the ceiling for how much it'll sell on PC. An extra 1 million, so, and I think that'll push it to 5 million, right? Like that'll probably give it a nice 5. Reorganize development team into 5 console teams, 1 smartphone team, and 1 game team. So this is something that, I mean, this basically says that yeah, that basically implies there are no more CBUs. Like there is no CBU 3 or 1. They're just Square Enix. So the company. Oh wait, I'm reading this wrong. My bad. Reorganized into 5 teams, so they are still on their same teams, and 1 smartphone team. But that's still a restructuring. My bad. I misunderstood that. And yeah, they're called creative studios now. So that was my bad. I misunderstood. I confused it with another line, which is has relied on too much on an individual's creativity, will promote game sharing, making know-how, I assume, among teams, and will seek best balance of individual creativity and organizational discipline. So that is basically a way of saying that the teams are going to be a lot closer now. And lastly, Dragon Quest 12 remains under development. So that's good. I'm glad the DQ12 is not being canceled. I didn't think that it would be. That wouldn't make any sense. So, and investors react. Sell shares heavily. Stock fell to the day's trading limit. Concerns our pipelines have become too empty. That their pipelines have become too empty. No big titles that can lift up the company's top line over the next couple of years. So that's to say that investors think, at the very least, that there is nothing that's coming out that is going to basically be like a 10 million plus seller. That can like basically be a game changer for it. I think KH4 is next year. Maybe. I don't know. I don't really have a good read on when KH4 is coming. It would be nice if KH4 was coming next year. I think we will get a KH4 update this year, though. I think a KH4 update this year is like certain. People take that line that KH4 is nowhere near out, but isn't this just saying they don't think that any games will push a good sale? Yes, exactly. And by the way, that's not Square Enix saying that. That's investors reacting. And so a lot of people aren't looking at this breakpoint right here that says investors react and that there's concerns that there's nothing. So it's not Square Enix feels they don't have anything that is going to come out and be a big seller. Is just that the perception of shareholders is that that they don't have anything else, right? And that's not an unfair perception, I guess, because Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, you know, the company's moneymakers, the flagship series, Final Fantasy, for that to like not be doing well, it does kind of put things in a position where it's like, yeah. Brandon, thank you for the super chat. Imagine if they remastered Chrono Trigger for today's systems. I think that they totally should, and there's nothing I would love more. However, I also think too that like they would have to market that a lot, right? Like they'd have to market a remaster of Chrono Trigger really well, because what it we used to say when like, you know, something would happen like Final Fantasy 14 like 1.0 came out, we would say, well, if they remade FF7, if they remade FF7, they could dig themselves out of this hole. And then they remade FF7, and now they're in the hole. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think, you know, bluntly, I don't think that a remake or remaster of anything is like the thing that gets them out of this. I do think that Chrono Trigger remake could do well, but I think that they need to kind of like focus on something new. Let me message my girlfriend back. I just noticed. What TV show should they make? I think they should do a 14 animated show. I think that'd be cool. I don't know. Like that's such like a difficult question to ask because I didn't really ponder like what they should like it's just so hard, right? Like if you told me like before like Cyberpunk Edge Runners that Edge Runners would come out and be what it is for like a game like Cyberpunk, I wouldn't anticipate it, right? But I do think whatever they do should be related to either 7 or 14. If they do that, hypothetically. But it should be something FF7 or something FF14. One or the other. And the reason is because 14's ongoing and 7 is also ongoing too, and the sales of 7 remake would be really good. If you had to bet on it, which will come out first? FF9 remake, FF Tactics remaster, or Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D? Dragon Quest 3. Between those. Are we to take the investors' comments to insinuate that... I mean, the investors don't know anything that we don't know, to be clear. Like, they only know public information, right? And stuff that gets probably leaked to them. But aside from that, they don't really know tremendously more than we do. And I don't think that there, and that's also a thing too, right? Is that I don't see that I don't see Tactics Remaster or FF9 remake lifting their top line, right? And by top line they mean like selling, like selling. You know what I'm saying? Like like a big like 10 million plus seller basically or something alike. Which I don't anticipate FF9 remake or FF Tactics Remaster really being. Tactics Remaster I see doing 1 million right now, and FF9 remake I see doing like 3 million. But I do think that FF9 remake could do more than 3 million if the anime goes well. I think it can do more. So you're gonna call me on my bias, which is fair. But with the floundering state of FF as a whole, I do think it's past time that SC tries to push Dragon Quest in the West. No, I agree. Capitalize on the success of the turn-based style RPGs in the West that have been doing fairly well the past few years, pushing the F out of merch. Dragon Quest has so much mirth with the Kira Toriyama art. Like, come on, people would love it. Yeah, no, I think the West is finally ready for Dragon Quest. I think 11 was proof of that. I think it's time. I think it's time for Dragon Quest to have a big push in the West. And I just think that, like, you know, too, that like Japanese games are typically AA, like nowadays. Well, JRPGs, I should say, not Japanese games. Capcom, for example, is AAA. But JRPGs are typically AA. Final Fantasy is like the only AAA JRPG. And I think that it might just be okay for FF to not be the AAA JRPG. But what this tells me, what they've said, is that they're going all in on big AAA releases because they want that $10 million sale. Yeah, KH is also kind of like a AAA JRPG. So Pokemon and Persona are not AAA at all. Pokemon sure is fucking hell. is not AAA. There is not a AAA thing about Pokemon. That shit. Pokemon is a single A. Pokemon's a B. It's not even an A. At this point, dog. It's triple B. Quadruple A sales. Yes, I agree with that for sure. Pokemon's like triple C, yeah. Yeah. Pokemon is not triple A. Yeah, I don't know where you got that one. Is Xenoblade AA or AAA? Xenoblade probably leans closer to AA. Typically, when we say the word AAA to distinguish better, we're talking about The Last of Us, God of War, Final Fantasy 16 or Rebirth, Elden Ring, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, those sorts of games, right? Spider-Man, Horizon Forbidden West. That's AAA. That's generally what people mean by that. AAA was as a term created by Western devs and journalists to describe FF7 in relation to its development costs and production values for its time with the finished product. Too long didn't read. AAA literally just means hyper expensive and needs higher end visuals. Like, people don't understand, it never meant quality. It was always just about how expensive the game was. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what it is. AAA is a term used to describe a very expensive game with like a like 300 million plus dollar or not, or like 200 million plus dollar budget. Although 300 million is pretty common now too, if not more. 400 million is also getting pretty common. So yeah, Nintendo games, aside from Zelda, typically wouldn't be described as AAA. It's just purely because Nintendo does not spend that much money making most of their games, aside from like Breath of the Wild. And typically with AAA games, there's an association, but not necessarily true of, or not necessarily a rule, I should say, that AAA games do not typically have aggressively, or they do typically have aggressively realistic graphics. You can absolutely make a AAA game that has stylized graphics. But yeah, typically AAA is kind of referencing bleeding edge graphics and a very, very, very big budget. Missed the PS1 days. Vagrant Story had a vastly less budget than any FF, but was far more visually and technically impressive. We don't see games like that anymore. Yeah, it's because it's impossible. Yeah, I mean, back then, if you had like a really good 3D modeler that was able to make like really cool 3D models and they could run on a PS1, then you could have something like Vagrant Story that even though it had like less budget, it was still able to make it. And yeah, I agree with you 100%, bro. Like I miss that era too. Like I think this is why indie has kind of become a thing too, like such a big thing. Is that indie is kind of like where you're getting like all these creative ideas and stuff, right? Whereas like nowadays you have to create this aggressively big thing that is designed, and I mean, design's not even the word. It's engineered to not fail. It's engineered to sell to as many people and be as safe as humanly possible. Because if we're going to spend $300 million making a game, we better make damn sure that not only that it makes all of its money back, but we need this thing to profit. You know why we need this thing to profit? Because it takes 5 to 7 years to make a current generation AAA game. 5 to 7 years. And by the way, we don't have employees or bandwidth to be making other stuff on the side anymore. You know why? Because we need 400 plus people in order to make this project work. So we need 400 people. We need everyone in the studio. We need all of the money. And we need half a decade or 70% of a decade in order to make one game. Beyond even the money, the opportunity cost, the time that it takes to make a single AAA game is so absurd, is so ridiculous, is so expensive. What are we doing? What are we doing, guys? How do we step away from this? How do we step away from spending this much? I say we spending, like not like we're spending it. The companies are spending it. And then they're going broke, and then they're firing employees over it. It's absurd. It's absurd. And I don't think that AAA needs to be, I don't think every game needs to be AAA. A lot of my favorite games over the past few years have been AA. Right? Like, I think Nier Automata was a better game than Final Fantasy 15 by 100 miles. And Nier Automata cost a fraction of what it took Final Fantasy 15 to be made. And yeah. And it also sold really well. So I wonder how much it cost SE to restart development on Remake after CyberConnect 2 was removed. That probably cost a lot, yeah. And they probably lost a lot of time too. So I don't know, guys. I don't know. All right, so I think that's going to be the stream for today. We're going to raid my friend BioRoxas if you're on Twitch. I typed BioBroxas. We're gonna raid BioRoxas on Twitch, and if you're on YouTube, I want to thank you guys too. Thank you guys for all of the incredible super chats today. You guys like poured money on me like crazy. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll see you guys all tomorrow. I'm gonna have a video together on some of my constructed thoughts because you guys have given me actually a lot to think about and a lot to talk about in a video. So yeah, so look forward to a video that probably will happen tomorrow. I love you guys, and I'll see you all later. Peace.